Hey, how did you sleep last night? If you're a fan of scary stories to fall asleep to, you've found the right place. Welcome to Midnight Lullaby. A like and a subscribe means a lot to this channel, and make sure we will meet again. Also, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. The call came at 3 in the morning. I was used to strange hours in my line of work as a maritime salvage consultant, but something about the harbor master's voice made my skin prickle with unease. The celestial dreams had appeared in the shipping lanes just before midnight, drifting without lights, without radio contact, without any sign of the 3,000 souls who had vanished with her 7 years ago. By dawn, I was standing on the deck of the Coast Guard cutter, watching the massive ship materialize through the morning mist like a ghost condensing into flesh. She looked exactly as she had in the photographs from 2018. Pristine white hull, elegant lines, the kind of luxury vessel that promised escape and adventure. But there was something wrong about her stillness. Ships aren't meant to be this quiet. The boarding was silent except for the splash of our inflatable against her hull and the metallic clang of the ladder. I went up first, my gloved hand gripping rungs that felt oddly warm despite the cold ocean air. When I pulled myself over the rail, I stood for a moment, just breathing, just listening. The deck was perfect. Not abandoned perfect, but maintained perfect. The teak wood gleamed with fresh polish. The white deck chairs sat in neat rows, their cushions plump and without a trace of mildew. A cocktail glass rested on a side table, condensation still beating on its surface, as if someone had set it down moments ago. But when I touched it, the liquid inside was room temperature, flat, lifeless. "This doesn't make sense," Martinez said behind me. He was the Coast Guard's lead investigator, a man who'd seen 3 decades of ocean mysteries. His face was pale. Ships don't just maintain themselves. We moved through the upper decks in a tight group, our footsteps echoing strangely, as if the ship were amplifying them, listening to us. The pool was full of crystal clear water. The buffet tables in the outdoor cafe were set with china and silverware, salt and pepper shakers standing at attention. Everything was ready. Everything was waiting. But for what? The automatic doors still worked, sliding open with a soft whisper as we approached. Inside, the air conditioning hummed steadily, keeping the temperature at a comfortable 72 degrees. The lobby stretched before us, a cathedral of marble and brass, chandeliers blazing with light that seemed too bright, too aggressive for a ship that had been lost for 7 years. "Power shouldn't be possible," I murmured. "Even the best backup generators would have run out of fuel years ago." "Maybe someone's been here," Martinez suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. There was dust, but not where there should be. The high corners and hidden crevices were pristine, while the main surfaces, the reception desk, the information booth, the bronze railings, had a fine layer of gray powder as if it had been deliberately placed there, a stage dressing of abandonment. We split into teams. Martinez took half the group to investigate the engine rooms and mechanical spaces. I led the others to the passenger decks, starting from the top and working our way down. The key cards still worked in the locks, as if the ship's computer systems had never stopped running, never questioning the absence of their masters. The first cabin I entered belonged to the Hendersons, according to the passenger manifest we'd brought. The bed was made with military precision, towels folded into swans on the pillows. Suitcases sat open on the luggage rack, clothes neatly folded inside. On the nightstand, A phone displayed a text message, still waiting to be sent. Having the most wonderful time. Wish you were here. The date stamp read March 15, 2018, the day before the ship disappeared. But something was wrong with the clothes. I picked up a shirt, and it felt strange in my hands. Too stiff, too uniform, as if it had been precisely arranged molecule by molecule. I dropped it, and it hit the floor with a sound that was almost musical, a crystalline chime that didn't belong to fabric. In the next cabin, family photos sat on the dresser. I recognized the Kowalskis from the news coverage, a couple in their 60s celebrating their 40th anniversary. But as I looked at the photos, I realized all the faces were slightly blurred, just enough to make me uncertain of their features. And the longer I stared, the more the blur seemed intentional, as if something didn't want me to remember what they looked like. We checked cabin after cabin, and each one told the same story, lives interrupted mid-moment, frozen in time, but somehow wrong. A book left open to a page that was blank. A child's toy that hummed a melody I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. A pair of glasses that, when I looked through them, showed me the room exactly as it was, but somehow different, as if I were seeing it through someone else's memory of the room, rather than the room itself. The dining room was the worst. The main restaurant sprawled across 2 decks, tables set for dinner service that had never come. But someone, or something, had arranged the place settings since the ship had returned. The plates were clean, the glasses sparkled, but when I looked at the menu printed in elegant script, the words seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into combinations that made my head ache. Grilled memories of salmon, roasted uncertainty with herb conscience, fresh regret salad. I blinked hard and the words became normal again. Salmon with lemon butter. Roasted chicken with herbs. Caesar salad. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen the truth for just a moment, and the ship had quickly covered it up. In the ship's theater, a movie played on an endless loop. The screen showed footage of the passengers, thousands of them, enjoying their cruise, dancing in the nightclub, swimming in the pool, laughing over dinner. But they never spoke. The entire film was silent except for a low humming that I felt more than heard. A vibration that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat and then began to pull at it, trying to synchronize us. I backed out of the theater quickly, my hand pressed to my chest, feeling my heart struggle to return to its normal rhythm. Found something? Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. Engine room. You need to see this. The journey down to the engine deck felt longer than it should have, as if the ship were stretching itself, reluctant to let us reach whatever Martinez had discovered. The corridors seemed to curve in ways that didn't match the blueprints I'd studied. Doors appeared where there shouldn't be doors, and the numbers on the cabin plates repeated themselves in sequences that made no mathematical sense. When I finally reached the engine room, I found Martinez standing in front of the main control panel, his face illuminated by hundreds of green lights. Behind him, the massive engines hummed with steady power, but they weren't burning fuel. They weren't burning anything. Look at this, he said, pointing to a display screen. It showed the ship's position, tracked over the past 7 years. The celestial dreams had never stopped moving. She'd traced a pattern across the Atlantic over and over, a shape that, when I looked at it from a distance, resembled a human face screaming. That's not possible, I whispered. None of this is possible, Martinez replied. The engines are running on nothing. There's no fuel, no external power source. It's as if the ship itself is generating energy from, I don't know what. And look at this. He pulled up another screen, this one showing the ship's internal sensors. Every cabin showed signs of occupation. Weight on the beds, water usage in the bathrooms, fluctuations in air temperature consistent with human presence. But there was no one here. We'd searched. We'd called out. We'd used thermal imaging. The ship was empty, except it wasn't. I felt it then, the sensation I'd been pushing away since I boarded. We weren't alone. The ship was full. Not with people, but with the spaces where people should be. The absences shaped like souls, walking through their routines, living lives that had ended 7 years ago, but couldn't quite stop. "We need to leave," I said. "No." But when we tried to return to the upper deck, the corridors had changed. The path we'd taken down no longer existed. We walked for what felt like hours, passing the same junctions, the same doors, the same emergency exit signs that pointed in contradictory directions. The ship's PA system crackled to life occasionally, announcing activities that would never happen. Midnight buffet now being served on Deck 7. Trivia night in the Constellation Lounge. Don't forget to set your watches back 1 hour. Time. That was the key somehow. I looked at my watch and saw the hands spinning backward slowly, inexorably. My phone showed dates scrolling in reverse. The ship wasn't just lost in space. It was lost in time, caught in some loop or fold that prevented it from moving forward. We found ourselves back in the lobby, though neither of us could say how we'd gotten there. The chandeliers seemed brighter now, almost painful to look at. And in the mirrors that lined the walls, I caught glimpses of movement. Shapes that might have been people, passing behind us, around us, through us, always in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I turned to look directly. "Do you hear that?" Martinez asked. I did. Music, faint, distant, coming from somewhere deep in the ship. Big band music. The kind they would have played in the ballroom. And beneath it, voices. Not words, exactly, but the rhythm and cadence of conversation, laughter. The sound of 3,000 people enjoying themselves, all rendered down to pure tone, divorced from meaning. We followed the sound, no longer trying to navigate, just letting the ship guide us. It wanted to show us something. I understood that now. The celestial dreams had come back not to be rescued, but to share what had happened to it, to pass on its curse or its knowledge, or whatever incomprehensible thing it had become. The ballroom doors stood open. Inside, the vast space was dark, except for a single spotlight in the center of the dance floor. And in that spotlight, I saw them. Not people, but impressions of people, like photographs exposed onto the air itself. They moved in time to music that kept skipping, repeating the same 8 bars over and over. They danced the same steps. I turned to face partners whose features I couldn't quite see, smiled smiles that didn't reach eyes I couldn't focus on. One of the figures turned toward me. It was a woman in an evening gown, her face a blur of features that shifted and reorganized themselves as I watched. She extended a hand, inviting me to dance. And God help me. Part of me wanted to step onto that floor, to join them in their eternal, repeating moment. Martinez grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Look at the floor." I looked down. The spotlight wasn't coming from above. It was coming from below, through the floor, from some source deep in the ship's hull. And in that light, I could see shadows cast upward. Dozens of them, hundreds, all connected to the dancing figures, all stretching down into the depths of the ship, where something vast and patient was waiting. We ran. Not with any plan or direction, just away from the ballroom, away from those dancing absences and their invitation to join them. The ship fought us, doors closing ahead of us, corridors dead-ending, but we kept moving, kept searching for the way out. And finally, impossibly, we burst through a door, and found ourselves on the deck where we'd boarded. Our inflatable was still there, tied to the ladder. The Coast Guard cutter waited in the distance. Dawn was breaking again, or still breaking, I couldn't be sure. We were over the side and into the boat before anyone could speak. As we pulled away, I looked back at the Celestial Dreams. She sat there in the water, pristine and perfect. Her lights blazing, welcoming. And on every deck, pressed against every window, I saw them. The passengers, the crew, all 3,000 souls, not waving goodbye but beckoning, calling us back, wanting us to understand what they'd understood, to join them in whatever they'd become. The Coast Guard cutter's engines roared to life, pulling us away. But I kept watching until the ship disappeared into the morning mist, fading like a dream, like a memory, like something that might never have been there at all. Except I know it was. And I know it's still out there, still drifting, still waiting. The Celestial Dreams didn't come back to be saved. It came back to recruit, to share its eternity of frozen moments and infinite repetition. And sometimes in the hours before dawn, I feel it pulling at me. A gentle insistence that I have unfinished business aboard, that there's a cabin with my name on it, a place set for me at dinner, a dance waiting to be danced. I haven't told anyone about the dreams I've had since that morning. Dreams where I'm back on the ship, walking those perfect corridors, and everything makes sense in a way that waking life never has. Dreams where I understand that the Celestial Dreams isn't haunted or cursed. It's achieved something, transcended something, found a way to exist outside of time's cruel progression. And in these dreams, I'm not afraid. I'm home. The harbor master calls sometimes, asking if I'll consult on another attempt to board the ship. It keeps appearing in the shipping lanes, you see. Every few months, there it is again, drifting, waiting, ready to welcome new passengers to its eternal cruise. I always say no. But I keep the harbor master's number saved in my phone, and sometimes I find myself hovering over it. My finger trembling above the call button, wondering what it would be like to go back, to step aboard one more time, to finally accept that invitation to dance. The water outside my window is dark tonight, and somewhere out there, the Celestial Dreams is sailing under stars that no longer move, carrying passengers who no longer age, sailing toward a destination that exists only in the space between moments. And part of me, a part that grows larger each night, wonders if that's really such a terrible fate after all. The question isn't whether I'll go back. The question is when. Because the ship is patient, and it knows something I'm only beginning to understand. We're all already aboard. In one way or another. We've all been passengers on the Celestial Dreams since the moment we were born, sailing toward that final port where time stops and the dancing never ends. I can hear the music now, faint but growing clearer. The same 8 bars, over and over, a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, that pulls at something deep inside me. And I know that soon, very soon, I'll follow that music back to where it began, back to the ship that waits for me in the space between waking and sleeping, between memory and dream, between the world as it is and the world as it might have been. The Celestial Dreams is calling. And this time, I think I'm ready to answer. Story 2. I found the cafe by accident, though I've since come to believe there are no accidents where the hourglass is concerned. It was 3 in the morning, and I was driving home from the hospital where my mother had been sleeping through her final days, her breath growing shallower with each visit. I'd been coming from her bedside for weeks now, driving the same route home, watching the city lights blur past my windows. But that night, I took a wrong turn. Or maybe it wasn't wrong. Maybe it was exactly the turn I needed to take. The street was one I'd never seen before, narrow and lined with old brownstones that seemed to lean toward each other like gossiping neighbors. And there, in the middle of the block, was a cafe with its lights on. Warm, golden lights spilling out onto the sidewalk through large windows. The sign above the door read, "The Hourglass," in elegant cursive script, and beneath it, smaller letters promised, "Always open." I should have kept driving. I wasn't hungry, wasn't thirsty, wanted nothing but to collapse into bed and forget for a few hours that my mother was dying and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But something about that light, that warmth, pulled at me. I found myself parking, stepping out into the cool night air, pushing open the cafe door. A bell chimed. Not the electronic buzz of modern establishments, but a real bell, brass and clear. The interior was exactly what the exterior had promised: old-fashioned charm, with marble-top tables, bentwood chairs, and a long counter with brass fixtures. The walls were lined with photographs in mismatched frames, and soft jazz played from speakers I couldn't see. There were perhaps a dozen people scattered throughout the cafe. A young woman in a corner booth, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. An elderly man by the window, reading a newspaper with a date I couldn't quite make out. A couple at a table near the back, holding hands across the surface, not speaking, just looking at each other with an intensity that made my chest ache. Behind the counter stood a woman who might have been any age from 40 to 70, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes kind and knowing. She smiled when she saw me. "Welcome to the Hourglass," she said. "Sit anywhere you like. I'm Eleanor." I chose a table near the middle of the room, somewhere I could watch the other patrons without being obvious about it. Eleanor brought me a menu written in the same elegant script as the sign outside, offering coffee and tea, pastries and sandwiches, breakfast served all night. "Just coffee," I said. "Black." She nodded, as if she'd expected exactly that answer, and disappeared behind the counter. I looked around the cafe more carefully now. The photographs on the walls showed people, some clearly from decades past based on their clothing and the sepia tone of the prints, others more recent. But they all shared something: they were waiting. Sitting at train stations, standing at bus stops, pausing in doorways, all with expressions of anticipation mixed with uncertainty. Eleanor returned with my coffee in a heavy ceramic cup, the kind they don't make anymore. The coffee was perfect. Hot, strong, exactly what I needed. I wrapped my hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into my palms. "First time here?" Eleanor asked, wiping down the table next to mine even though it was already clean. "I didn't know this place existed," I admitted. "I've driven this road 100 times. People find us when they need to," she said simply. "The Hourglass has a way of appearing." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she'd already moved on to another table, refilling the elderly man's coffee, though his cup was still 3/4 full. He thanked her without looking up from his newspaper, his eyes never leaving whatever article had captured his attention. I sipped my coffee and watched the other patrons. The young woman in the corner hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked as far as I could tell. Her coffee cup sat before her like an offering at an altar, untouched, probably cold. The couple in the back continued their silent communion, fingers intertwined, gazes locked. And slowly, gradually, I began to notice things that weren't quite right. The man's newspaper. I could see the date now. May 17, 1987. 37 years old. The couple's clothing was subtly wrong too, styled in a way that suggested the early 2000s. And the young woman's phone, lying face up on the table beside her coffee, was a model I recognized from at least 15 years ago. My hand tightened on my cup. "Eleanor," I called softly. She appeared beside me immediately, as if she'd been waiting for my summons. "Yes, dear." "These people," I said, keeping my voice low. "How long have they been here?" Eleanor smiled, sad and gentle. "As long as they need to be. The Hourglass is a waiting place. Everyone here is waiting for something, or someone." I looked at her ageless face and knowing eyes. "What are they waiting for?" "Different things. The young woman is waiting for her girlfriend to come back from a trip. The trip happened in 2009. There was an accident. But she's still waiting, just in case there was a mistake, in case the door opens and the person she loves walks through it." Eleanor gestured to the elderly man. "He's waiting for the stock market report that will tell him his investment paid off, that he can finally retire and take that trip to Italy. He's been waiting since 1987, but that's impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" Eleanor asked. "Time works differently in the Hourglass. This is a place between moments where the waiting becomes the thing itself. Some people get so caught up in anticipation that they forget to live in any other way. And eventually, they end up here, where they can wait forever if they choose to." I felt cold despite the warm cafe, despite the hot coffee in my hands. And the couple. Eleanor glanced at them, her expression tender. "They're waiting for the right moment to say goodbye. They both know they can't stay together. Life is pulling them in different directions. But they can't quite let go. So they sit here, holding hands, putting off the inevitable." I set down my coffee cup with a hand that trembled slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're here, which means you're waiting too." Eleanor pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, her eyes searching my face. "What is it you're waiting for?" The answer came unbidden, rising from somewhere deep inside me. For it to be over. For my mother to die so I can stop watching her suffer. For permission to grieve instead of hovering in this terrible in-between. The words hung in the air between us, terrible and true. I'd never admitted it before, not even to myself. But here, in this cafe out of time, with these people who had waited themselves into ghosts, I could finally say it. Eleanor nodded slowly. "The waiting is worse than the thing itself sometimes. The anticipation of pain can be more unbearable than the pain when it finally comes. But there's a danger in waiting, you see. You can get so comfortable with it, so used to holding your breath for the next moment, that you forget you're still alive in this moment." She gestured around the cafe. Everyone here forgot. They're waiting for things that might never come, or things that already came and went while they were too focused on the future to notice. They're comfortable here, safe. Nothing can hurt them if they're always waiting, always anticipating, never actually living. I looked at the young woman with her cold coffee, at the old man with his ancient newspaper, at the couple frozen in their eternal farewell. How long have they been here? Really, time doesn't work that way here, Eleanor said. They've been here forever, and they've been here 5 minutes. They'll be here as long as they choose to wait. Unless what? Unless they realize that waiting isn't living. That sometimes you have to step out of the waiting room and into the world, even if it means facing the thing you've been dreading. Eleanor's eyes held mine. You could stay here, you know. We always have room for one more. You could wait here where it's warm and safe, where you never have to face your mother's death, never have to experience that final goodbye. Time would stop for you, just like it has for them. No more pain, no more fear, just eternal anticipation. The offer was tempting in a way I hadn't expected. To stop the clock, To freeze myself in this moment before the worst happened, to never have to walk into that hospital room and see my mother's chest stop rising, to never have to sign papers and make arrangements and stand at a graveside. But as I sat there, considering it, I noticed something else about the cafe's patrons. The young woman wasn't peaceful in her waiting. Her hands were clenched, her jaw tight, her eyes haunted by a hope that had curdled into obsession. The old man's newspaper was shaking slightly in his hands, tears running down his weathered cheeks as he read the same article over and over, trapped in a moment of financial ruin he could never change. And the couple, their clasped hands were bloodless, their locked gazes desperate. And I realized they weren't exchanging love so much as drowning in it, unable to come up for air. They weren't comfortable. They were tormented by their own inability to move forward, to let go, to accept what was and step into what would be. I don't want to end up like them, I said quietly. Eleanor smiled, and this time there was approval in it. Then don't. Finish your coffee and go home. Go to your mother. Sit with her, even though it hurts. Hold her hand, even though you know you'll have to let go. Be present for the ending, because that's what love requires. Not eternal waiting, but the courage to face what comes. I drank the last of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I finished it anyway. When I set down the cup, Eleanor was already standing, already clearing it away. "How much do I owe you?" I asked, reaching for my wallet. "Nothing," she said. "The first cup is always free. It's what comes after that costs something." I stood, feeling as if I were waking from a dream or falling into one. The cafe seemed less solid now, the edges softer, the light more diffuse. The other patrons were fading too, becoming translucent, their features blurring. "Will I be able to find this place again?" I asked. "Only if you need to," Eleanor said. "Only if you find yourself waiting instead of living. But I don't think you will. You're choosing differently." I walked to the door, my hand on the brass handle. Before I opened it, I turned back. "What about you, Eleanor? What are you waiting for?" She smiled, enigmatic and sad. "Me? I'm not waiting, dear. I'm the one who reminds others that they can stop. That's my purpose here. Everyone has a role to play." I stepped out into the night. The door closed behind me with the clear chime of that brass bell. When I turned to look back, the cafe was gone. The building was there. A brownstone like all the others on the street, but dark, empty, with a "for lease" sign in the window. I drove home through streets that suddenly looked familiar. I'd been on this street before, I realized. I passed it twice a week on my way to the hospital. But I'd never seen the cafe until tonight, when I needed to. The next morning, I went to the hospital as usual. But something had changed. Instead of standing in the hallway, bracing myself before entering my mother's room, I walked straight in. Instead of perching on the edge of the chair, ready to flee, I pulled it close to her bed. Instead of avoiding her hand, fearful of feeling how cold it had become, I took it in both of mine. "I'm here, Mom," I said. "I'm not waiting anymore. I'm just here." Her eyes fluttered open. She'd been mostly unconscious for days, and for a moment, they were clear, present, knowing. She squeezed my hand with what little strength remained, and in that squeeze, I felt release. Not hers, mine. The terrible tension of waiting for death dissolved, replaced by the simple, profound experience of being with her while she was still alive. She died 2 days later, peacefully, with me holding her hand. And yes, it hurt. It hurt more than I'd imagined possible. But it was a clean hurt, a real hurt, not the corroding ache of anticipation. It was the pain of love concluding, not the torture of love suspended. After the funeral, after the reception, After all the necessary rituals of death had been completed, I drove through the city at 3 in the morning, retracing the route I'd taken that night. I looked for the street, for the brownstone, for any sign of the Hourglass Cafe. I never found it. The street I remembered didn't exist in any mapping app. The brownstone with the "For Lease" sign belonged to a street 3 blocks over, and when I checked, it had been empty for 5 years, not just one night. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night, I catch glimpses of it from the corner of my eye. A warm light spilling onto a sidewalk. The elegant script of that sign promising, always open. And I know that somewhere, in the spaces between moments, the cafe still exists. Still serves coffee to people who have forgotten how to stop waiting. Still offers the tempting promise of frozen time, of never having to face the thing they fear most. I could find it again, I think, if I really wanted to. If I let myself slip back into that state of desperate anticipation, of living always in the next moment instead of this one. It would be easy, especially now, with so many things uncertain, so many potential losses on the horizon. But I don't search for it, because Eleanor taught me something in that one cup of coffee. Waiting is a kind of death all its own. When we wait, we stop living. We become like those patrons, frozen in anticipation, missing the life that's happening all around us while we focus on what might come next. My mother's death taught me the same lesson. She spent her last years waiting too. Waiting to get better, waiting for one more treatment, waiting for the future she'd always imagined. And in all that waiting, we missed so many present moments we could have shared. I won't make that mistake again. I won't spend my life in the Hourglass Cafe, nursing cold coffee and old newspapers, holding hands with someone I'm afraid to let go of, staring at a door that will never open the way I want it to. Instead, I choose the messy, painful, beautiful present. The moment as it is, not as I wish it would be. The courage to live in real time, even when real time brings heartbreak. But I think of the cafe often, especially when I catch myself slipping into that waiting state again. Waiting for the weekend, waiting for things to get better, waiting for my real life to begin. And when I notice myself doing it, I remember Eleanor's gentle, knowing smile. I remember the young woman with her cold coffee. I remember the old man with his ancient grief. I remember the couple unable to say goodbye. And I remember that I chose differently. I walked out of the cafe. I finished my coffee and left the waiting room. I chose the painful, perfect now over the safe, suspended forever. That's the thing about time. It moves forward whether we're ready or not. We can fight it. We can try to freeze ourselves in amber like those eternal patrons of the Hourglass. Or we can move with it, accepting each moment as it comes, even the moments we wish we could avoid. The cafe is still there, I'm sure of it. Still serving coffee to those who can't quite let go of what might be. Still offering shelter to those who find the future too frightening and the present too painful. But I'm not going back. I've learned what waiting costs. And I've learned that the only moment we ever really have is this one. Not perfect, not what we planned, but real and alive and ours. So I live in real time now, where coffee cools if you don't drink it, where newspapers yellow and become irrelevant, where goodbyes hurt, but must be said, where mothers die and hearts break and nothing waits forever. It's harder this way, but it's real. And after spending that night in a cafe outside of time, surrounded by people who had chosen comfort over reality, I know which one I prefer. Sometimes, late at night, I make myself a cup of coffee. I hold the warm cup in my hands, and I think about Eleanor, about that brass bell, about the photographs of waiting people on the walls. And I make myself a promise. I will drink this coffee while it's hot. I will read today's news, not yesterday's. I will say the goodbyes that need saying and hold the hands that need holding, even if I know I'll have to let go. I will live in the present, no matter how painful it is. Because the alternative, eternal waiting, eternal anticipation, eternal suspension in that comfortable, terrible cafe, is a fate worse than any ending. The hourglass is always open, Eleanor said, and I believe her. It's open for anyone who needs it, for anyone who's forgotten how to stop waiting. But not for me. Not anymore. I've chosen to leave the cafe. I've chosen to live in time. And that choice, difficult as it is, has made all the difference. Story 3. The night market comes to our neighborhood every Thursday. It arrives without announcement, appearing in the vacant lot on Maple Street, as if it had always been there. By the time the sun sets, the space transforms. Strings of Edison bulbs crisscross overhead. Food stalls emit plumes of fragrant steam. And vendors call out their wares in a melodic chorus that draws people from blocks away. I'd been going to the market for 3 years before I noticed the doll stall. This bothered me, once I realized it. The stall occupied a prime location near the entrance, where everyone had to pass it to reach the deeper sections of the market. How had I overlooked it for so long? The vendor, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, sat behind a table crowded with porcelain dolls of every size and description. Victorian dolls in elaborate dresses, baby dolls with painted cherub faces, marionettes dangling from wooden crosses, and cloth dolls that looked handmade. But it was the eyes that caught my attention that first night I really saw them. Each doll had glass eyes, and each pair seemed to catch the light in peculiar ways. As I walked past, I could have sworn I saw a flicker, a brief flash like a camera going off, or like light reflecting off water. I stopped and turned back, studying the dolls more carefully. They stared back with vacant glass expressions. "Beautiful, aren't they?" the vendor asked. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "Each one is unique. Each one sees differently." "Sees?" I repeated, startled by her choice of words. She smiled, revealing very white, very even teeth. "Sees the world, I mean, from their perspective. On a shelf or in a child's arms or in a collector's case. Every doll has a different view." I nodded, feeling oddly uncomfortable. "They're very lifelike." "Oh, they're not trying to be lifelike," she said, her smile widening. That would be missing the point entirely. Before I could ask what she meant, someone else approached the stall, and the vendor's attention shifted. I continued into the market, but throughout the evening, I found my thoughts returning to those dolls and their strange, light, catching eyes. The following Thursday, I made a point of stopping at the doll stall. The vendor recognized me immediately. "You came back," she said, sounding pleased. "I had a feeling you would. You have the look of someone who notices things." "What kind of things?" I asked. She gestured at the dolls. "Patterns, repetitions, small inconsistencies that most people overlook." She picked up a Victorian doll in a burgundy dress, turning it to face me. "For instance, have you noticed how the market is always exactly the same?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The same stalls in the same locations. The same vendors selling the same items. Week after week, year after year. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" Now that she mentioned it, it did seem odd. Markets were supposed to change. Vendors came and went, inventory rotated. New stalls appeared while others disappeared. But I realized I'd been seeing the same faces, the same products, the same layout every single Thursday for 3 years. I never thought about it, I admitted. "Most people don't," she said. "That's what makes them comfortable." But you're different. You notice things. That's why you can see the eyes. See the eyes. The phrase made my skin prickle. She held up the Victorian doll. Watch carefully. I stared at the doll's glass eyes, blue, with black pupils painted in the center. As I watched, something shifted. For just a moment, the pupils seemed to dilate, expanding slightly before contracting again. A trick of the light, surely. But then I saw it happen again, and again. A slow, rhythmic pulsing. They're blinking, I whispered. No, the vendor corrected gently. They're seeing. There's a difference. I should have left then. Every instinct told me to walk away from this stall and never return. But curiosity, or something deeper, something I didn't want to name, kept me rooted in place. What are they seeing? I asked. The vendor's smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound sadness. That depends on who's looking. Each person sees something different in the eyes. It reflects what they need to see, or perhaps what they fear seeing. I've never been entirely certain which. She set down the Victorian doll and picked up another. A baby doll with a soft cloth body and a porcelain face. Its eyes were brown, innocent, wide with painted wonder. This one, she said, was made from the last doll a mother gave to her daughter before the daughter grew up and stopped playing with dolls. It remembers the touch of small hands and the sound of bedtime stories. Look into its eyes. I leaned closer, studying the brown glass eyes. At first, I saw only my own reflection, distorted by the curve of the glass. But as I continued to stare, the reflection seemed to deepen. I could see past my own face into something else, a memory that wasn't mine. A child's bedroom, soft light filtering through curtains, a woman's voice humming a lullaby. The sensation of being held, of being loved, of being protected. But underneath it all, a growing awareness that this would end. That childhood ends. That mother's let go. That dolls get packed away in attics and forgotten. I jerked back, my heart racing. What the hell was that? I demanded. The vendor carefully placed the baby doll back on the table. I told you, they see. And when you look into their eyes, sometimes you see what they see. It's not always pleasant. This is insane, I said, backing away from the stall. They're just dolls. Glass eyes and porcelain. Of course they are, she agreed pleasantly. Just dolls. But then you're just flesh and bone, and somehow you see and remember and dream. Why should dolls be any different? I left the market early that night, hurrying past the other stalls without stopping. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every doll in every shop window, every toy in every child's hands, every porcelain face seemed to track my movement with knowing eyes. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the market. But Thursday came again, and my feet carried me to Maple Street, as if by their own volition. The market had appeared as it always did, identical to the week before and the week before that. I walked past the familiar stalls, the jewelry vendor, the vintage clothing seller, the spice merchant, until I stood once again before the doll stall. The old woman looked unsurprised to see me. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her. About the market always being the same. You're right. Everything's exactly identical week after week. The same music playing from the loudspeakers, the same smells from the food stalls, the same people walking the same routes. Yes, she said simply. How is that possible? She picked up a marionette, her wrinkled fingers gentle on the strings. How is any of this possible? A space that's empty 6 days a week suddenly fills with light and life and commerce every Thursday night. Where does it all come from? Where does it go when the market ends? The marionette's wooden face stared at me with painted eyes. Except they weren't entirely painted, I realized. There was glass there too, small circles of reflective glass set into the wooden face. And in those eyes, I saw the same pulsing, the same slow rhythm of dilation and contraction. "Are they all like this?" I asked, gesturing at the table full of dolls. "All of them, seeing. Every single one," she confirmed. "I've been collecting them for longer than you can imagine. From all over the world. Every culture makes dolls, you know. Every civilization. There's something fundamental about the impulse to create a human form and then imbue it with meaning." She set down the marionette and selected another doll. This one modern, with a plastic face and synthetic hair. Its eyes were a startling green. "This one is different from the others," she said. "This one doesn't remember the past. It sees the future." "That's impossible," I said automatically. "Isaac, you've already seen the impossible. Why draw the line here?" She held the doll out to me. "Look into its eyes. Tell me what you see." Despite every screaming instinct, I took the doll. It was lighter than I expected, hollow feeling. The green eyes stared up at me with an intensity that seemed wrong for a mass-produced toy. I looked into those eyes. This time, there was no gradual deepening, no slow revelation. The vision hit me like a physical blow. I saw myself standing in this same spot, at this same market, holding this same doll. But I was older, years older, my hair graying, lines deepening around my eyes, and I was crying. Tears streaming down my face as I clutched the doll to my chest. Behind me, the market was changing. The Edison bulbs flickered and died, one by one. The vendors packed up their stalls with slow, mechanical movements. The music from the loudspeakers distorted into something almost recognizable but fundamentally wrong. A melody played backward, or in a key that shouldn't exist. And the dolls, all the dolls on all the tables, turned their heads in unison to watch me. Hundreds of glass eyes, all pulsing with that same rhythm, all focused on my future self as I stood there weeping. In the vision, I looked down at the doll in my arms. Its green eyes met mine, and I heard a voice, not spoken aloud, but directly in my mind. "You've been here before. You'll be here again. How many Thursdays until you understand?" I dropped the doll. It clattered onto the table, its green eyes still staring upward. The vendor caught it before it could roll off, setting it carefully upright. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "I saw myself," I said, my voice shaking, older, crying. The market was ending, or changing, and all the dolls were looking at me. She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "The future is fluid, you understand. What you saw is only one possibility. But possibilities have a way of becoming inevitable when we're not careful." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "What's going to happen to me?" "That's not the right question," she said. "The question is what's already happening to you. What's been happening all along?" I looked around the market with new eyes, really seeing it for the first time. The same vendors in the same spots. The same customers walking the same paths. The same music, the same smells, the same lights. "It's a loop," I whispered, "isn't it? We're all caught in some kind of loop." The vendor's expression was impossible to read. Perhaps. Or perhaps this is simply what Thursday nights look like, and we're all exactly where we're supposed to be. Does it matter which is true? "Of course it matters," I said, louder than I intended. Several nearby shoppers glanced my way. "If we're trapped in a repeating cycle, we need to break out. We need to?" "Need to what?" She interrupted gently. "Go home. Return to your other days, your other routines. Are those any less repetitive? Any more real?" I had no answer. She picked up another doll, a vintage composition doll with cracks in its face, giving it an appearance of great age despite its childlike proportions. Its eyes were an odd amber color, like honey held up to light. This is my favorite, she said softly. It was made in 1947. It's seen more Thursdays than you or I combined. Would you like to know what it sees when it looks at you? No, I said immediately. It sees all your Thursdays. She continued as if I hadn't spoken. Everyone you've lived and everyone you will live. They stretch out behind and ahead of you like a string of identical beads. And in each one, you come to this market. In each one, you stop at this stall. In each one, we have this conversation. That can't be true, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Can it? Think back to your first Thursday here. What do you remember? I tried to recall that initial visit 3 years ago. What had brought me to the market that first time? Why had I returned the second time? The memories felt thin, insubstantial. Present but generic, like someone had described them to me, rather than me actually living through them. I started, then stopped. You don't remember, she finished for me. Not really. You remember being here, but not the specific details. Because there are no specific details. It's always the same Thursday, at the same night, the same choices leading to the same outcomes. My mind reeled. If that's true, then what's the point? Why bother coming here at all? She smiled sadly. Because Thursday night is beautiful, isn't it? The lights, the music, the sense of community and wonder. Because even if it's all a repetition, each iteration feels fresh and new. Because maybe the comfort of repetition is preferable to the chaos of change. I looked down at the table full of dolls. All those glass eyes, all pulsing with that slow rhythm, all seeing, all remembering, all knowing. How do I break the cycle? I asked.
Do you want to?
She countered. Really think about it. What exists outside the market? What are you rushing back to when Thursday night ends? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. What did I do on Friday? On Saturday? On the other days that weren't Thursday? The memories were there, vague and present, but they felt distant, unimportant. Less real than this moment, this market, this conversation. I don't know. I admit it. Neither do most people, she said. They live their weeks waiting for Thursday, living for Thursday, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all there is. I picked up the vintage doll with amber eyes, holding it carefully. What do you see? I whispered to it. When you look at me.
What do you see?
The amber eyes pulsed, slow, rhythmic, hypnotic. And in that rhythm, I felt myself beginning to understand. Each pulse was a Thursday. Each beat was a return to this market, to this stall, to this moment of recognition and confusion and acceptance. On and on, forever, a heartbeat of recurring nights. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'll come back next Thursday, I heard myself say. I know, the vendor replied. You always do. I set down the doll and walked back through the market. The lights seemed warmer now, the music more melodic, the scents more inviting. I bought soup from the usual vendor and browsed the vintage clothing stall I'd browsed 100 times before. Everything was familiar. Everything was comforting. Everything was exactly as it should be. When I reached the exit, I turned back for one last look. The market stretched before me, beautiful and eternal, bathed in golden light. And at the entrance, I could see the doll stall, the old vendor, and row after row of watching eyes. They pulsed in unison now, all of them. Hundreds of dolls across dozens of stalls throughout the market, all keeping the same rhythm. The heartbeat of Thursday night. I walked home, and the week passed in a blur of vague activities and unmemorable moments. Work, perhaps. Errands, possibly. The details didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the approaching Thursday. When it came, I found myself walking to Maple Street. The market had appeared, as it always did, identical and eternal. I passed the familiar stalls, greeted the vendors I'd known for years, and stopped at the doll stall. The old woman smiled at me. "Welcome back," she said. And I realized she'd been waiting. They'd all been waiting. The entire market, every vendor and every customer, and every doll with its pulsing glass eyes. All of us caught in the same beautiful, terrible loop. All of us returning week after week, Thursday after Thursday, to the same lights and the same music and the same inevitable cycle. "I have a question," I said. "Of course you do," she replied. "You always do." "Am I?" I hesitated. "Am I real? Outside of Thursdays, do I exist at all?" She picked up a new doll, one I hadn't seen before. A simple wooden figure with jointed limbs and eyes made from polished black stones. "What an interesting question. Tell me, do the dolls exist when no one is looking at them? Do Thursdays exist when it's not Thursday? Does anything exist except in the moment of its experience?" The wooden doll's stone eyes didn't pulse like the others. They remained constant, steady, infinite. Looking into them, I saw no memories, no futures, no visions. Just darkness, just possibility, just the void from which all patterns emerge. "I think," I said slowly, "that I've been coming here for much longer than 3 years." "Yes," she agreed. "I think I'll be coming here for much longer still." "Yes. And I think," I continued, my voice barely a whisper, "that I'm not entirely sure what I am when it's not Thursday night." As she reached out and patted my hand, her touch surprisingly warm. "Does it matter? You're here now. You're real now. This moment exists, and you exist within it. Isn't that enough?" Around us, the market pulsed with life. The same life it had pulsed with last Thursday, and the Thursday before, and all the Thursdays stretching back to the beginning of... what? Time. Memory. The market itself. I bought a doll that night. The wooden one with stone eyes. The vendor wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and handed it to me with a knowing smile. "Take care of it," she said. "Special. They're all special," I replied. "Yes," she agreed. "But this one will help you remember." "Remember what?" "That you chose this, that you keep choosing this. Every Thursday, you choose to return. And that's not a trap. That's a gift." I carried the doll home, and when I unwrapped it later that night, its stone eyes seemed to glow faintly in the darkness of my bedroom. I set it on my nightstand, where it could watch over me as I slept. And when I woke, it was Thursday again. Or still Thursday. Or always Thursday. The distinction no longer seemed important. I returned to the market every week. I stop at the doll stall. I talk to the vendor. I look into glass eyes and see the truth of my existence pulsing back at me. Slow, steady, eternal, and I'm content. Because Thursday night is beautiful. Because the market is eternal. Because the dolls see everything, and in their seeing I am seen. I am known. I am real. At least I am real on Thursdays. And really, what more could anyone ask for? Story 4. The silence began on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when the Hendersons had their piano lessons. Every week, at precisely 4 in the afternoon. The hesitant notes of "For Elise" would drift through our shared wall, punctuated by Mrs. Henderson's patient corrections. The sound had become such a fixture of my life that I barely noticed it anymore, until it stopped. That first silent Tuesday, I assumed they'd canceled the lesson. Perhaps little Emma was sick, or they'd decided to take a spontaneous trip somewhere. The Hendersons were spontaneous like that. I'd seen them pack their station wagon at odd hours before, off to some adventure that Mr. Henderson would enthusiastically describe to me later over the fence. But Wednesday came, and their car remained in the driveway. Thursday arrived with no sign of movement next door. By Friday, I began to notice other absences, No lights flickering on as evening fell. No morning newspaper disappearing from their front step. No sounds of life whatsoever emanating from their pale blue colonial. I should have checked on them sooner. It was Saturday morning when I finally walked up their front path. The newspaper had accumulated into a sad pile, their pages yellowing in the autumn sun. I knocked on their door, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo in the stillness. No answer. I tried the doorbell, hearing its cheerful chime echo somewhere deep inside the house. Nothing. I peered through the front window, cupping my hands against the glass. The living room looked normal at first glance, the floral sofa where Mrs. Henderson always sat with her crossword puzzles, the upright piano against the far wall, Emma's toys scattered across the rug. But something felt wrong. The air inside seemed different somehow, as if the house itself were holding its breath. That's when I noticed the walls. Every wall I could see from my vantage point was covered in writing. Not casually scrawled graffiti, but dense, meticulous text that covered every square inch of wallpaper. The writing was small, cramped, obsessive. From this distance, I couldn't make out individual words, but I could see the pattern. Lines and lines of text, spiraling in concentric circles, growing tighter and tighter until they converged at a single point in the center of each wall. My heart began to beat faster. I tried calling their phone. Through the window, I could see their landline ringing on the side table, its red light blinking urgently. No one answered. I let it ring 20 times before hanging up. The rational part of my brain suggested I call the police. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the growing certainty that whatever I would find inside wasn't something you called the police about. Not yet. I tried the back door. The Hendersons had given me a spare key years ago, when I'd agreed to water their plants during a vacation. I'd never returned it. Now, as I retrieved it from my junk drawer and walked around to their back entrance, I felt a peculiar mixture of guilt and dread. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened with a soft sigh, and I stepped into their kitchen. The smell hit me immediately. Not the decay I'd half expected, but something stranger. It was the scent of old paper and ink, mixed with something metallic and faintly sweet. The kitchen looked normal: dishes in the drying rack, magnets on the refrigerator holding up Emma's crayon drawings, a half-full coffee maker on the counter. But the walls, God, the walls. Up close, I could read the writing. It covered every surface. The wallpaper, the cabinets, even the refrigerator door. The text was written in different hands: Mr. Henderson's blocky print, Mrs. Henderson's flowing cursive, and what must have been Emma's wobbly lettering. They'd written the same words over and over again. We are not who we thought we were. Variations appeared as I moved through the kitchen. We are not who we think we are. We are not who you think we are. We were never who we thought. Who we are is not who we were. The sentences twisted and transformed. Each iteration slightly different, as if they'd been searching for the correct phrasing of some fundamental truth. My hands were shaking as I moved into the living room. Here, the writing grew more complex. Between the repeated mantras, I found longer passages, fragmentary accounts of realizations and revelations. Mrs. Henderson's handwriting dominated one section of wall. I looked in the mirror this morning and didn't recognize the person looking back. Not in the way you might think. I recognized her face. My face. But I suddenly understood that the recognition itself was false. A habit of identification rather than actual knowledge. Who am I behind the face I've learned to calm? Further along, Mr. Henderson had written, asked Emma if she remembered her birthday party last month. She said yes. Asked her to describe it. She described a party that never happened. Different guests, different games, different cake. When I pointed this out, she looked confused. Then she looked terrified. Then she said, "Which birthday party, Daddy? The one I remember or the one that happened?" I felt my breath coming shorter. The house was so quiet. No ticking clocks, no humming refrigerator, no ambient sounds at all. It was as if I'd stepped into a photograph of a house rather than an actual home. The stairs beckoned. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound obscenely loud in the silence. The stairwell walls were covered in diagrams. Family trees that branched and split in impossible ways. Flowcharts mapping relationships between people who couldn't possibly all exist. Timelines that loop back on themselves. Emma's room was the worst. Her walls weren't covered in writing but in mirrors. Someone, presumably her parents, had taped dozens of mirrors of varying sizes across every surface. Small compact mirrors, hand mirrors, pieces of broken mirror, even reflective paper. The effect was dizzying, fracturing my reflection into countless variations as I stepped inside. On her small desk, I found a notebook. Emma's childish handwriting filled the pages. I looked at myself 60 times today. Each time I looked different. Mom says that's normal. But which one is really me? The one in the bathroom mirror looks scared. The one in the hallway mirror looks older. The one in my hand mirror doesn't look like me at all. She has my face but different eyes. Eyes that know things I don't know. Further down the page, Mom and Dad say they're my parents. I believe them because I always have. But when I try to remember learning that they're my parents, I can't. It's just something I've always known. But how can you always know something without learning it first? Where does the first knowing come from? My reflection stared at me from a dozen angles, and I found myself unable to look away. Which one was real? They all showed the same person. Or did they? That one in the far mirror looked slightly younger. That one seemed to be standing in a different position than I actually was. That one, I forced myself to look away. The master bedroom continued the pattern. Here, the Hendersons had written what appeared to be a dialogue, their handwriting alternating across the walls. When did we meet? College, 1995. We've talked about this. Yes, but can you picture it? Really picture it, not just remember that we met. I can't. I know we met. I know we fell in love. But it's like remembering a movie someone described to me rather than something I lived through. Do you remember proposing? Of course. Describe it. You can't? Can you? I remember the feeling of it, the joy, the certainty. But not the actual moment. Does it matter? I think it's the only thing that matters. The writing grew more frantic as it progressed. What created Emma? I remember being pregnant. I remember the hospital. I remember bringing her home. But when I try to recall her as an infant, all I can see is how she is now. A 7-year-old girl. I cannot picture her any younger, even though I must have seen her younger. I must have held her as a newborn. Why can't I remember her face from back then? And then, in large letters that covered the entire wall above their bed, E-R-E or Fargs T-B Riel. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. The house felt heavier now, as if the walls were pressing inward. I needed to leave. I needed to call the police and let them handle this. This was beyond me. But I found myself drawn to one final room. The door at the end of the hall had been closed. Now it stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. I pushed it open. It was a study or office. Unlike the other rooms, the walls here were bare. Clean white paint, no writing, no mirrors, no obsessive scrawling. Just a single desk with a computer, its screen dark. On the desk, arranged in a neat row, were 3 driver's licenses. I picked up the first one. Mr. Henderson's face stared back at me from the photo, but the name was wrong. James Mitchell. The address was different. The birth date was different, Mrs. Henderson's license showed her face, but named her Sarah Chen. Emma's license. Why would a 7-year-old have a driver's license? Identified her as Rebecca Wilson, age 32. My hands went numb. The licenses slipped from my fingers, scattering across the desk. That's when the computer screen flickered to life. I hadn't touched anything. The screen simply illuminated, casting a cold blue glow across the room. Black text appeared against a white background. You shouldn't have come inside. I stared at the words, my mind refusing to process them. New text appeared. You're not who you think you are either. No, I whispered. When was the last time you looked at your own reflection? Really looked? I couldn't remember. Days, weeks. I'd glanced at mirrors, certainly, but when had I last truly studied my own face? What is your earliest memory? I tried to think. I could remember yesterday and the day before and long stretches of my life. But when I reached for the beginning, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, the memories felt thin, present but insubstantial, like images in a photograph album rather than lived experiences. Where are your parents buried? I knew they were dead. I knew I'd attended their funerals, but I couldn't picture the graves. Couldn't remember the cemetery's name. Do you have their death certificates? No. Why didn't I have their death certificates? When was the last time anyone called you by name? I thought back through my recent interactions. The grocery store clerk who'd said, "Have a nice day." "Hey, sir." The mail carrier who'd nodded hello. The neighbor kid who'd waved. No one had actually said my name in how long? Say your name out loud. I opened my mouth. My name was... The cursor blinked patiently on the screen. I knew my name. Of course I knew my name. I'd had it my entire life. It was right there in my mind, familiar as my own face. But when I tried to speak it, to actually form the sounds, I found I couldn't quite remember what sounds to make. New text appeared. The Hendersons remembered. That's why they had to leave. Leave where? I asked aloud, my voice strange to my own ears. Where did they go? The same place you're going. The screen went dark. I stood in the silent house, in the empty room, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a family's dissolution, or transformation, or whatever this was. I should leave, walk out the door, go back to my own house, call the police, let someone else handle this, return to my normal life. But was my life normal? Had it ever been? I walked slowly back down the stairs, through the living room, past the obsessive writing on every wall. In the kitchen, I paused by the refrigerator. Among Emma's crayon drawings, I found one that made me stop. It showed 3 figures, presumably the Henderson family, standing in front of their house, but they weren't drawn with faces. Instead, where their faces should have been, Emma had drawn mirrors. And in those mirrors, reflected back, were different people entirely. People I didn't recognize. In the corner of the drawing, in Emma's careful print, this is what we really look like. I left through the back door, locking it carefully behind me. Back in my own house, I did something I hadn't done in longer than I could remember. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. The face that looked back was familiar. I'd seen it countless times. It was my face, wasn't it? I stared into my own eyes, trying to see past the surface, trying to find the person behind the face. The more I looked, the stranger I appeared. Features I'd never consciously noticed before suddenly seemed arbitrary. Why did I look this way? When had I decided this was my face? I reached up and touched the mirror, my fingers meeting their reflection. On the other side of the glass, I could have sworn my reflection smiled. a split second before I did. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Through the wall, I could hear something from the Henderson house. Not the piano. Not Emma's laughter or her parents' voices. Just a sound like writing, like pen on paper, continuous and soft, filling page after page after page with words I would never read. In the morning, I knew I would find a pen in my hand, and I would begin to write. We are not who we think we are. We are not who we think we are. We are not who we think we are. The words would fill my walls, one by one, until I understood what the Hendersons had understood, until I remembered what they remembered, until I forgot what they forgot. Outside my window, I can hear other pens scratching on other walls. The whole neighborhood is waking up, or going to sleep. I'm no longer certain which. Story 5. The house came with a playground in the backyard. The realtor didn't mention it. The listing photos carefully avoided that corner of the property, showing instead the garden beds and the oak tree and the fence that needed repair. It wasn't until the first walkthrough that I saw it. A rusted swing set, a metal slide with paint peeling in long strips, a small merry-go-round tilted at an angle that suggested broken bolts and settled earth. The previous owners had children. The realtor said when she noticed me staring. She said it quickly, the way people do when they're trying to move past something. Decades ago. They never got around to removing it. Decades. The equipment looked older than that. The swing set's chains were orange with rust, the seats worn down to bare wood. The slide had plants growing up through gaps in its supports. The merry-go-round's paint was so faded I could barely tell what color it had been. Blue, maybe, or green, or something in between. The family lived here for 40 years. Had their children, raised them, watched them move away. Then just stayed. She walked back toward the house, heels clicking on the stone path. Anyway, it's a great property. Good bones. Needs some work, but that's reflected in the price. I bought the house anyway. The playground bothered me. Yes, but in an abstract way. The kind of discomfort that seems manageable in daylight, with a realtor's cheerful patter filling the silence. I had plans to remove it immediately, to call someone to haul it away before I even moved in. But moving is exhausting, and the playground was in the back corner of a large yard, easy to ignore. I told myself I'd deal with it next week, then next month, then next season. The equipment sat there through my first autumn in the house, through winter when snow softened its harsh angles, through spring when weeds grew thick around its base. And sometimes, late at night, I heard the swing set creaking. Just the wind, I told myself. Metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Old structures settling. All the rational explanations that help us sleep in houses that are never quite silent, never quite still. But the creaking had a rhythm. Back and forth, like someone was swinging, like someone was keeping perfect time, pumping their legs with practiced ease, rising higher and higher into the dark. I didn't look out the window when I heard it. I learned that quickly. The first time, I went to the bedroom window and peered out into the backyard, and my mind couldn't quite process what I saw. The swing was moving, yes, but the motion was wrong somehow. Too smooth, too steady, too perfect for wind or settling. I stared at it for a long time, trying to see if there was a shape in the seat, a shadow of something sitting there. But the darkness was too complete, and my eyes kept sliding away from the swing itself, unable to focus properly. The creaking continued all night. In the morning, the swing hung perfectly still, the chains straight and unmoving. I examined it in daylight, looking for some mechanical explanation. Maybe wind caught it at certain angles. Maybe the chains were uneven, creating that rhythmic sound. But I found nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the perfect back and forth timing I'd heard. I resolved, again, to remove the playground. Called 3 different hauling services. The first never called back. The second took the job but never showed up on the scheduled day. The third came out, looked at the equipment, and quoted a price 3 times higher than his initial estimate. "Old metal's unpredictable," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Could be hazardous. Probably needs special permits. Environmental assessment. You know how it is." I knew he was lying. I knew he simply didn't want the job. But I didn't push. Some part of me. Some growing part I didn't want to acknowledge. Wasn't entirely sure I wanted it removed anymore. The sounds started changing. Not just the swing now, but other noises. The slide's metal surface would ping and boom, as if something was descending it, feet hitting each section in sequence. The merry-go round would squeal as it turned, slow rotations that went on for minutes at a time. And underneath it all, if I listened carefully, I could hear something else. Laughter, maybe, or crying. Or something that was both at once, something that existed in the space between joy and sorrow. I started spending more time watching the playground, sitting at the kitchen window with my coffee, staring out at that corner of the yard. During the day, it looked sad and harmless, a monument to childhood that had long since moved on. But as evening approached, as shadows lengthened and light took on that golden quality that comes before dark, the equipment seemed to shift. Not physically. I never caught it moving. But it seemed more present somehow, more solid, more there in a way it wasn't during full daylight. One evening in late summer, I saw a child on the swing. Just for a moment. A flicker at the edge of vision, there and gone so fast, I couldn't be sure I'd seen anything at all. But the swing was moving in the twilight, chains creaking with that perfect rhythm, and something was in the seat. Something small and child-shaped, pumping its legs in silhouette against the darkening sky. I blinked, and the seat was empty. But the swinging continued, slowing gradually, chains creaking with diminishing arcs, until finally it hung still and silent. My hands were shaking. I set down my coffee cup before I could drop it. This was it, I thought, the moment to act. Call someone, leave the house, do something rational and self-preserving. Instead, I walked outside. The evening air was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of cut grass and flowers whose names I'd never learned. Crickets sang in the underbrush. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. But they seemed muted as I approached the playground, as if the equipment existed in a bubble of dampened noise, a pocket where sound traveled differently. Up close, the rust was worse than I'd thought. The swing set's metal supports were corroded nearly through in places. The chains looked like they could break at any moment. The seats were cracked and weathered, splinters poking out from ancient wood. But the right swing, the one I'd seen moving, still held warmth. I touched the seat, and it was warm like body heat, like someone had just been sitting there seconds ago. The chains were slightly damp, as if from sweaty palms gripping them. And in the dust that covered everything, I could see impressions. Small handprints, child-sized. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. I someone there. The playground equipment stood silent. The crickets had stopped singing. Even the breeze had died, leaving the evening air perfectly still. Then, from the top of the slide, I heard a sound. A soft scraping, like fabric against metal. Like someone climbing up the ladder, reaching the platform, preparing to descend. I should have run. Should have gone back inside, locked the doors, called the police or a priest or anyone who might help. But I was transfixed. Watching the slide's metal surface gleam in the fading light, waiting to see what would emerge from the top. Nothing appeared. But something came down. I couldn't see it directly. My eyes refused to focus on the presence descending the slide. But I could see its effects. The way the metal dimpled slightly under weight. The way a shadow fell despite no visible source. The way the temperature dropped as it passed, cold radiating outward, like winter breaking through summer's heat. It reached the bottom and was gone. Or not gone, I realized. Just moved. Just somewhere else in the playground, occupying one of the other pieces of equipment, waiting for me to turn around or look away or lose focus for just a moment. Why are you here? I asked the empty air. What do you want? The merry-go round began to turn. Slowly. That grinding squeal I'd heard, so many nights now happening right in front of me. It rotated with agonizing deliberation, empty seats passing through my field of vision one by one. But they weren't all empty. As each seat came around, I glimpsed something sitting there. Never the same thing. Different children, different ages, different clothes from different eras. A girl in a dress from the 1950s. A boy in overalls that might have been from the 1930s. A toddler in clothing I couldn't date, too young to pump their legs or hold on. Just sitting there as the merry-go round spun them in endless circles. They all looked at me as they passed. Not with hostility or hunger or any emotion I could name. Just looking. Observing. Cataloging this new person who'd come to live in the house, who watched their playground, who heard their play but had never joined it. The merry-go round slowed, stopped, leaving one seat directly facing me. Empty. Or seemingly empty. But the air above it shimmered like heat haze, and I could feel pressure there. Could sense something sitting in that seat, something watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle and my breath come short. I'm sorry, I said, not knowing what I was apologizing for. I'm sorry you're trapped here. I'm sorry you can't leave. I'm sorry about whatever happened. The pressure intensified. The shimmer grew stronger, almost coalescing into a visible form. I caught fragments. A hand. A face, eyes that were too large and too dark, and too knowing for a child. Then it dissipated, falling apart like smoke in wind. All the equipment began moving at once. The swings pumped in perfect synchronization, rising higher and higher until the chains went nearly horizontal at the apex of each arc. The slide boomed and pinned with dozens of invisible descents. The merry-go-round spun faster, seats blurring together, the squeal becoming a constant scream of stressed metal. And through it all, I heard them. The children. Laughing and crying, playing and screaming, alive and dead in something that was neither. Their voices layered over each other until they became a single sound, a chorus of childhood trapped in eternal recreation. I ran back to the house, their voices following me across the yard. Inside, I slammed the door and locked it, though I knew locks meant nothing against whatever haunted that playground. Through the window, I watched the equipment slowly wind down, the movements becoming smaller, the sounds quieter, until finally everything was still again. But I could see them now. The children. Translucent in the twilight, barely visible, but unmistakably there. Dozens of them, more than could possibly fit on the small playground. They crowded around the equipment, waiting their turns, playing together, existing in that space the way children have for decades, for generations, for however long that playground has stood in that corner of the yard. I researched the house that night, digging through property records and old newspapers. The playground wasn't built by the previous owners. It was much older than that, part of the property since at least the 1920s. The house had gone through many families over the years. Many families with children. And I found the accidents, not all at once, but scattered through decades of local news. A child who fell from the swing set in 1934. Another who struck her head on the slide in 1956. A boy who got his hand caught in the merry-go rounds mechanism in 1978. Never serious injuries, the article said. Just accidents. The kind of thing that happens when children play. But there were other articles too. Obituaries. Children who died in the house or near it, from illnesses or accidents or unexplained causes. Too many spread over too many years. To be simple coincidence. The playground collected them. That's what I understood, sitting there in the dark with my laptop glowing. The equipment drew them in, held them. Kept them playing long after their bodies were buried and their families moved away. A haunting, yes, but not a malicious one. Just children doing what children do, forever and always, trapped in the moment of play. I should have moved out, put the house back on the market and left. But I didn't. I couldn't quite articulate why, even to myself. Maybe because running felt like abandonment. Maybe because I was curious. Or maybe because some part of me understood that wherever I went, I'd always wonder about the children in the playground, always see them at the edges of my vision, always hear that creaking swing in the quiet moments before sleep. So I stayed. The sounds continued, night after night. I grew accustomed to them, these auditory markers of invisible play. The swings creak, the slides boom, the merry-go-rounds squeal. They became the house's rhythm, its heartbeat, the proof that I wasn't truly alone here. And sometimes, on especially clear evenings, I would sit by the window and watch them play. The children. Never fully visible, never quite solid, but there. Running and laughing and doing all the things children do. I learned to recognize individuals. The girl who always chose the left swing, the boy who went down the slide backwards, the toddler who could only manage to sit on the merry-go round while others pushed. They never came inside. That seemed to be a rule they followed, a boundary they couldn't or wouldn't cross. The playground was their domain, and the house was mine, and never the two should meet. Until the night I heard knocking on the back door. It was past midnight. I'd been asleep, dreaming something I couldn't remember upon waking. The knocking was soft, tentative, and the kind a child makes when they're not sure if they're allowed to knock at all. I went to the door, but didn't open it. Through the window, I could see the backyard bathed in moonlight. The playground stood empty and still. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The knocking came again. Definitely from the door. Definitely real. "Hello," I called through the wood. Silence. Then a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Can we come in?" A child's voice. Gender uncertain. Age uncertain. But definitely a child. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you want to come in?" "It's cold out here. It's been cold for so long. We want to come inside where it's warm." My hand went to the doorknob. I don't know what I intended to do. Open it, refuse, bargain. But before I could decide, I heard other voices. More children speaking over each other. "Please. We've been good. We've been waiting. It's our turn now. Please, please, please." The voices multiplied, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once, all asking with that heartbreaking politeness children use when they want something desperately. And I understood, suddenly, what would happen if I opened the door. They would come inside. All of them. Every child who'd ever played on that equipment, every spirit trapped in those rusted chains and weathered wood. They would fill my house, occupy every room, bring their eternal play into my domain. The house would become an extension of the playground, and I would become part of their collection. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back from the door. "I can't let you in." The voices stopped. Complete silence fell, so absolute it hurt my ears. Then the playground equipment began to shake. Not move, shake. Violent tremors that made the metal shriek and the wood crack. The swings jerked on their chains. The slide rattled in its supports. The merry, go, round spun in stuttering, uneven lurches. And the sounds that came from them weren't play anymore. They were rage. The children's voices rose again, but different now. Screaming, crying, demanding. The innocence was gone, burned away by fury at being denied. They hammered on the door, on the windows, on the walls. Dozens of small fists pounding with strength that shouldn't have been possible. I backed away from the door, into the center of the kitchen, heart hammering. The windows rattled in their frames. The walls seemed to bulge inward with each impact. And through it all, I could hear them screaming, "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" It went on for hours, or minutes. Time became meaningless in that storm of rage. I huddled in the kitchen, covering my ears, trying not to hear the accusations and pleas and threats that the children hurled at my walls. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Dawn light was creeping through the windows. I could hear birdsong, traffic from distant streets, all the sounds of the waking world. I went to the back door and looked out. The playground stood silent. One of the swings hung at an odd angle, chain broken. The slide had a new dent in its side. The merry-go round-tilted further than before, one of its supports bent. Damage, but not destruction. And scratched into the door at child, height, where words dibby-wum-eyed, I live with it now. With them, the nightly sounds of play, the glimpses of translucent children, the knowledge that something watches my house from that corner of the yard. I keep the doors locked at night. I don't go outside after dark. And I never, ever respond when I hear knocking. The playground remains. I've stopped trying to remove it. I understand now that it can't be removed, not really. Tear down the equipment, and it would just come back. Or the children would find some other anchor, some other way to maintain their presence. Better to leave it where it is, contained, trapped in that corner where they've played for generations. Sometimes I wake at night and see small faces pressed against my windows, looking in, watching, waiting for the night when I forget to lock a door, when I'm too tired or too careless, when I let my guard down for just a moment. They're patient. They have nothing but time. And sometimes, in the space between sleep and waking, I wonder if I'm becoming like them. Trapped in this house the way they're trapped in that playground. Bound to this property by fear and habit and the strange comfort of routine. Maybe that's what they want. Maybe they don't need to come inside. Maybe they just need me to stay here, year after year, until the boundary between house and playground blurs, until I can't remember why I thought they were different places at all. The swing creaks in the darkness. Back and forth, back and forth. Perfect rhythm, endless motion, the sound of children playing in the space between worlds. I close my eyes and try to sleep. Tomorrow I'll call about removing the playground. Tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. And the children keep playing. Forever. Story 6. I first heard about Millbrook from a travel blogger's abandoned website. The post was dated 7 years ago. The comments section a graveyard of spam and broken links. But the description caught me. A village that exists only at night, marked by blue lights that dance through the valley like spirits searching for home. The blogger had planned to investigate, to spend a night documenting these mysterious lights. But the post had no follow-up. The blog simply stopped, mid-sentence in a way, frozen at that moment of anticipation before discovery. I'm a photographer specializing in nocturnal landscapes, drawn to the places where darkness pools deepest. I've spent nights in canyons and deserts, on mountaintops and frozen lakes, capturing the world that most people sleep through. So naturally, the idea of a village with unexplained lights called to me like a signal only I could hear. The drive took me through increasingly rural roads, pavement giving way to gravel, civilization thinning like air at altitude. My GPS lost signal around sunset, leaving me to navigate by an old paper map I'd bought at the last gas station. The attendant had looked at me strangely when I asked about Millbrook. "People don't usually go looking for that place," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Why not?" He'd shrugged, made a show of counting my change very carefully. "Just don't." Now, as twilight deepened to true darkness, I understood what he might have meant. The landscape around me felt wrong somehow, tilted at an angle reality didn't quite accommodate. Trees grew in patterns that seemed too regular to be natural, but too irregular to be planted. The road curved in ways that made my inner ear protest, as if I was ascending and descending simultaneously. Then I crested a hill, and there it was. Millbrook lay in a valley below, a cluster of dark buildings huddled together like frightened animals. No lights showed in any window. No street lamps marked the roads. The village was simply a darker patch of darkness, visible only as an absence against the lesser dark of the surrounding fields. But above it, around it, through it, the lights. They floated through the air like luminescent jellyfish drifting through deep ocean. Blue, yes, but not one blue. There were shades I had no names for, hues that existed somewhere between colors, shifting and pulsing with an internal rhythm that had nothing to do with electricity or flame. Some hung motionless over buildings. Others traced patterns through the air, following paths that seemed both random and purposeful, like insects following pheromone trails invisible to human senses. I stopped the car on the hillside and watched. My camera was already in my hands before I consciously decided to photograph them. The viewfinder showed what my eyes saw, but somehow less. The lights seemed dimmer through the lens, as if they existed partially outside the spectrum my camera could capture. Still, I took shot after shot, adjusting exposures, trying different settings, attempting to trap these impossible luminescences in pixels and digital memory. One light drifted close to my car. It hung outside the driver's window, bobbing gently like a balloon on a tether. Up close, I could see movement within it. Not flames exactly, but something that writhed and coiled, something with structure and intention. The blue light filled my car's interior, painting everything in shades of deep ocean and drowned moonlight. I reached out, slowly, and rolled down the window. The light didn't retreat. It hovered there, close enough to touch. I could feel something emanating from it. Not heat, but a sort of anti-heat, a drawing away of warmth that made my fingers ache with cold. And underneath that, a vibration, a frequency felt rather than heard, resonating in my teeth and bones. Then it drifted away, rejoining the others in their endless dance through the valley. I drove down into Millbrook. The road into the village was narrow, lined with stone walls that my headlights picked out in stark relief. The lights. I started thinking of them as ghost fires. The term feeling right in my mouth grew more numerous as I descended. They wove between buildings, clustered in doorways, traced the roof lines like foxfire on rotting wood. None of them provided any real illumination. They glowed, certainly, but their light seemed to fall only on themselves, refusing to spill over onto the world around them. I parked in what might have been the village square, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. My headlights showed a circular area paved in old cobblestones, a dry fountain at its center, buildings forming a rough ring around the perimeter. All the buildings were dark, all the windows empty. but not abandoned. I could sense the difference. These weren't ruins. This was a place waiting. I killed the engine. The headlights stayed on for a moment, then dimmed and died, leaving me in darkness broken only by the ghost fires. They cast just enough light to see by, though what I saw seemed to shift and change at the edges of my vision. A building that appeared to be 2 stories from one angle became 3 from another. A street that ran straight ahead seemed to curve back on itself when I looked away, and then back. I gathered my gear, camera, tripod, spare batteries, flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The air felt thick, almost liquid, as if the night here had a different density than night elsewhere. Each breath was an effort, not because of altitude or pollution, but because of presence. The darkness wasn't empty. It was full of something, packed with an invisible substance that pressed against my skin and made my clothes feel too tight. The ghost fires watched me. I knew they were watching even though they had no eyes, no faces, no visible means of perception. I could feel their attention like weight, like fingers pressing gently against my temples. I set up my tripod and began to photograph. Through the viewfinder, Millbrook looked almost normal. An old village, probably dating back a few centuries, built from local stone and styles that had gone out of fashion before my grandparents were born. But the ghost fires complicated every shot. They moved during long exposures, creating trails of blue light that twisted through the frames like script in a language I couldn't read. They clustered around certain buildings, avoided others. They traced patterns that might have been significant or might have been random. I couldn't tell which, and the uncertainty bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I was examining a particularly strange shot, a building that seemed to have too many windows, or windows in impossible locations, when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching from somewhere behind me. I turned, camera still in hand, and saw a figure walking across the square. Human-shaped, human-sized, but somehow wrong in the way the shadow in those messages had been wrong. The proportions were slightly off, or the movements were slightly out of sync, or something about the figure's relationship to the space around it was slightly impossible. The ghost fires parted around it, clearing a path, floating aside with what almost seemed like respect or fear. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said. A man's voice, I thought, though it had a quality like wind through caves, like echoes of echoes. "I'm just photographing the lights," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a photographer. This is what I do." The figure came closer. The ghost fire's light caught edges. A worn coat, weathered skin, eyes that reflected blue like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. He looked old, ancient even, but moved with a fluidity that suggested otherwise. Everyone says that. Everyone has their reasons. But the lights don't care about reasons. They only care about attention. "What are they?" I asked. "The lights, I mean." He smiled, though it wasn't a comforting expression. "What do you think they are?" "I don't know. Ball lightning, swamp gas, some kind of bioluminescence. Those are names. Words, the lights existed before words. They'll exist after." He gestured at the ghost fires floating around us. "They're older than the village. We built here because of them, not despite them. Built around them, tried to live alongside them. Thought we could coexist, can't you? For a while. For a night. Maybe for many nights, if you're careful, if you're respectful. If you don't look too close or ask too many questions." His eyes fixed on my camera. "But you take pieces of them away with you. Every photograph, every memory, every attempt to capture and understand, you're taking from them. And eventually, they take back. I should have left then. Should have packed my gear and driven back up that impossible road and never thought about Millbrook again. But the lights were so beautiful, and I'd already taken dozens of photos, and the night was still young, and I'd driven so far. "Just a few more shots," I said. The old man shook his head slowly. "That's what the last one said. The one who came with cameras and computers, trying to document everything. We found his equipment eventually, his car. But never him. Just his gear, arranged in a circle in the square. Cameras pointing inward at nothing. What happened to him? The lights happened. They always do." He started to turn away, then paused. "The village only exists at night. When the sun comes up, we diminish. Become less real. The buildings fade, the roads shift. By noon, there's nothing here but an empty valley. The lights go somewhere else. We don't know where. We go with them, or they go with us. It's hard to say which. That's impossible. So are the lights. So is this conversation. So is the fact that you'll stay anyway, no matter what I tell you." He walked away, melting into the darkness between buildings. The ghost fires closed around the space where he'd been, like water flowing back into a void. I stayed. Of course I stayed. I photographed until my first battery died, then changed it and kept photographing. The lights seemed to grow bolder, or perhaps I was simply becoming attuned to them. They drifted closer, lingered longer, traced patterns that almost made sense before dissolving into chaos again. I moved through the village, following them down narrow streets, through empty courtyards, into the spaces between buildings where darkness pooled deepest. Sometimes I glimpsed other figures, residents, I assumed, going about nighttime routines in their twilight existence. They watched me from windows. They stood in doorways. They followed at a distance, never speaking, never approaching, just observing with eyes that reflected blue in the ghost fire light. The village seemed larger inside than it had looked from the hill. Streets that should have led back to the square took me to new areas, new buildings I didn't remember seeing. I tried to mentally map the layout, but gave up after the third time I found myself in an area I was certain I'd never visited, despite having walked in a straight line from a place I recognized. The ghost fires led me onward. I realized at some point that I was following them more than photographing them. They drifted ahead like guides or lures, and I trailed behind with my camera, documenting their movements, trying to understand their patterns. One light in particular seemed to stay near me. Larger than the others, brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that might have matched my heartbeat, or might have been creating it. It led me to a house at the edge of the village. 2 stories, stone walls, a garden overgrown with plants I couldn't identify in the darkness. The ghost fires clustered thickly here. Dozens of them hovering around the building like moths around a flame or flies around carrion. The door stood open. I should not have entered. Every instinct screamed against it. But the ghost fires were so thick here, so numerous, and my camera was already rising to my eye, and my feet were already carrying me forward, and choice seemed like a distant concept, something that applied to other people in other places. Inside, the house was furnished but dusty, as if no one had lived here for years, but nothing had been removed. A living room with ancient chairs. A kitchen with dishes on the table. A stairway leading up into darkness. And ghost fires everywhere, filling the rooms with their non-light, their blue glow illuminating nothing but themselves. I photographed it all. The viewfinder became my world. Everything outside it felt unreal, insubstantial, while everything within it was solid and true. I climbed the stairs, following the ghost fires to a bedroom. More furniture, more dust. A window looking out over the village, over the valley, and on the dresser, a photograph. Old, faded, the kind printed on thick paper that photography doesn't use anymore. It showed a family, mother, father, two children, standing in front of this house in daylight. They smiled at the camera. Normal people, a normal family. But behind them, barely visible in the bright sunlight, were faint blue glimmers. Ghost fires, present even in day, even then, whenever then was. I picked up the photograph. The paper felt cold, far colder than the room's temperature warranted. And as I held it, I noticed something wrong with the image. The family's shadows fell in the wrong direction. The sun appeared to be directly overhead, but their shadows stretched to the side, as if cast by some other light source, some other sun existing at a different angle to reality. A ghost fire drifted close to me. The largest one, the one that had led me here. It hovered beside my face, close enough that I could feel its cold emanation, that strange vibration resonating in my skull. And within it, within that blue non-light, I saw something. Faces. Dozens of them, hundreds. Stacked like layers, like pages in a book. Like memories compressed into a single impossible space. Some I recognized. The old man from the square, the family from the photograph, others I'd glimpsed in windows and doorways. All of them watching me from within the light, all of them smiling with expressions that had nothing to do with happiness. And among them, toward the back of that infinite regression, I saw the blogger, the one whose abandoned website had brought me here. 7 years frozen in that smile, 7 years compressed into a moment, 7 years of watching new visitors arrive and never leave. I stumbled backward, dropping the photograph. It fell slowly, too slowly, tumbling through air that suddenly felt thick as water. The ghost fire followed me, tracking my movement with perfect precision. Other lights drifted in through the window, through the walls, through the floor. Converging on this room, on this moment, on me, I ran. Down the stairs, through rooms that were different than before, following corridors that hadn't existed on my way in. The ghost fires followed, growing more numerous, filling the house with blue light that showed me too much and not enough. I saw things in their glow, shadows with substance, spaces with depth they shouldn't have, angles that hurt to perceive. I burst out into the night and ran toward the square, toward my car, my camera equipment forgotten in that house. Behind me, the ghost fires poured out of the building like water from a burst dam. A river of blue light flowing after me through the streets. But the square wasn't where I left it. The streets twisted differently now, led to different places, deposited me in areas of the village I'd never seen. I ran past houses that leaned at impossible angles. I ran through gardens where plants grew in wrong directions. I ran across bridges over streams I hadn't noticed before, water flowing upward towards some inverse gravity. The ghost fires surrounded me now, no longer following but escorting, herding, guiding me deeper into Millbrook's midnight geography. And I understood, finally, what the old man had tried to tell me. The village didn't exist in the way normal places existed. It was a pocket, a fold in reality, a place where the ghost fires gathered because normal space couldn't quite hold them. And people who came looking, who tried to capture and document and understand, they became part of that fold, absorbed into the village's strange existence. I was becoming part of Millbrook. I could feel it happening, feel my connection to the outside world thinning like overstretched fabric. My memories of the drive here were fading. My knowledge of the world beyond the valley was becoming vague, unimportant, a dream I'd once had and was now forgetting upon waking. Ahead, I saw the square. My car sat where I'd left it, though it looked smaller now, more distant, as if viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. I ran toward it, Ghost fires swirling around me in tightening spirals. So close, so close. A light drifted directly in front of me, forcing me to stop. The largest one again, my constant companion. It pulsed with that heartbeat rhythm, and I realized the rhythm was sensing. My heartbeat and the light's pulse becoming one, becoming indistinguishable. Within it, the faces watched. And there was space there, I saw. Space for one more. Space for me. No, I whispered. The light pulsed. Please, no. It moved closer. I closed my eyes, felt that cold emanation surrounding me. Felt the vibration building in my bones until I was shaking, until I wasn't sure if I was standing or falling, awake or dreaming, real or already absorbed. Then, distant faint, barely perceptible, I heard a sound, a rooster crowing. The ghost fires recoiled as if burned, the one in front of me dim, pulled back, the faces within it expressing something that might have been fear or frustration or hunger denied. All around me, the lights began to fade, their blue glow diminishing like embers cooling, like stars dying. Dawn was coming. I ran. The village was already starting to shift, buildings becoming translucent, streets wavering like mirages. The ghost fires fled faster than I could follow, streaming away toward some refuge I couldn't perceive. The darkness itself was retreating, pulling back to reveal gray, pre-dawn light that looked harsh and real and beautiful. My car solidified around me as I reached it. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so hard I could barely fit them in the ignition. The engine turned over. Once, twice, finally catching. I didn't look back as I drove up the hill, up that impossible road that now seemed perfectly ordinary in the growing light. At the crest, I stopped and turned around. The valley was empty. No village. No buildings. Just grass and trees and a small stream winding through the hollow. In daylight, Millbrook didn't exist. Or it existed elsewhere. In whatever place the ghost fires went when sun touched the world. I drove home. I drove for hours through landscape that slowly became familiar again, real again. I stopped at the same gas station. Different attendant this time, who looked at me with normal indifference and didn't ask where I'd been. At home, I connected my camera to my computer with hands that still shook slightly. The photographs were there, hundreds of them, all perfectly exposed, perfectly composed, capturing the ghost fires in ways that made them look almost ordinary, almost explainable. All lightning, perhaps, or some chemical phenomenon, or camera artifacts. But in each photo, if I looked carefully, I could see faces in the lights. Dozens of them, all watching the camera, all smiling. And in the later photos, the ones taken in that house, I could see myself. My face appearing among the others in the largest light, translucent and faint, but unmistakably there. A ghost of myself, captured and contained, smiling that smile that had nothing to do with happiness. I deleted the photographs, all of them, emptied the trash, reformatted the memory card. But I can still see them when I close my eyes. I can still see that face in the light, still feel the vibration in my bones, still hear that rhythm that might have been my heartbeat or might have been something else's. Sometimes, late at night, I see blue lights out of the corner of my eye, faint, distant, barely there. They drift through my apartment like curious fish, exploring this new environment, this new addition to their collection. I don't photograph them. I don't even look at them directly. I just wait for dawn and tell myself I escaped. But in my dreams, I'm back in that valley. Back in Millbrook, when darkness falls and the ghost fires wake. And I'm standing in the square with all the others, all the visitors who came looking and were found. All of us smiling with faces full of blue light, all of us waiting patiently for the next photographer, the next blogger, the next curious traveler who hears about the mysterious lights and just has to see for themselves. The village only exists at night, but night always comes again, and we're always here, waiting. Story 7. I inherited my grandmother's photo studio on a Tuesday in October. The lawyer's office was quiet, just the sound of papers shuffling, and my grandmother's were being read in that particular monotone lawyers use for such occasions. Most of her possessions went to various relatives. Jewelry to my cousin, savings divided among her children, furniture to whoever wanted it. But the studio came to me. Your grandmother specified that you should have it, the lawyer said, peering at me over reading glasses. She said you were the only one who would understand. I didn't understand. I barely knew my grandmother. She'd been distant my entire life, living alone in that old building downtown, running a photo studio that somehow stayed in business despite the digital age making such places obsolete. I'd visited maybe 3 times as a child, remembered dim rooms and chemical smells, and my grandmother's sharp eyes watching me through the viewfinder of an ancient camera. But inheritance is inheritance, and I was struggling with rent, and the building was paid off. So I took the keys and drove downtown to see what I'd been given. The studio occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building, wedged between a coffee shop and a store that sold vintage clothing. The windows were dark, dusty, revealing nothing of the interior. Above the door, a faded sign read, Castellano Photography, since 1952, my grandmother's maiden name. She'd opened this place before she married, before my father was born, and had kept it through divorce and decades and changing fashions. Inside smelled of old paper and chemicals and time. The front room was a reception area, walls covered with framed photographs spanning 70 years. Family portraits, wedding photos, graduation pictures, all the moments people wanted preserved in silver and paper. The images were beautifully composed. My grandmother had been talented, but something about them made me uncomfortable. The subject's eyes seemed to follow me as I moved through the room. Their smiles seemed forced, held too long, stretched too wide. Through a doorway lay the studio proper. A large room with high ceilings, photographers' lights on stands, backdrops rolled against one wall, and in the center, the camera. Not modern digital equipment, but an enormous view camera on a wooden tripod, the kind photographers used a century ago. Black cloth draped over the back for the photographer to duck under while framing shots. Bellows extending from lens to body. A piece of equipment that belonged in a museum, not a working studio. But it wasn't dusty. None of this was dusty. The equipment gleamed as if cleaned daily. The floors were swept. Everything was maintained, preserved, waiting. For what? I found the darkroom in the back. Red light bulb overhead, trays of chemicals arranged on counters, clothespins hanging from lines strung across the ceiling, and photographs. Hundreds of them, clipped to the lines or stacked on shelves or filed in boxes. I pulled one out at random, a family portrait from what looked like the 1980s. Parents and 3 children, all dressed formally, smiling at the camera. But in the background, barely visible in the shadows behind them, was another figure. Indistinct, blurred, like someone had moved during the exposure. But I could make out a face, features that didn't quite match the era of the photograph. Older clothes, older styling, as if someone from an earlier decade had wandered into the frame. I pulled out another photo. A wedding from the 1970s. And there, standing at the back of the church, was a figure in clothes from the 1950s. Another photo, a graduation portrait from the 1960s. Behind the graduate, a shadow person in Victorian dress. Every photograph had them. These out of time figures lurking in the background, caught at the edges, existing in the spaces between subjects and setting. never quite in focus, never quite visible enough to identify, but unmistakably there, unmistakably wrong. I should have left. Should have locked the door and called someone to clear out the building and sell it. But I was curious now, and curiosity has always been my weakness. I began going through the photographs systematically, laying them out on the main studio floor, arranging them by decade. Patterns emerged. The out-of-time figures appeared more frequently in older photographs. In images from the 1950s and 60s, nearly every photo had at least one. But they weren't random. I started recognizing faces. A woman in a dark dress appeared in dozens of photos across 3 decades. A man in a suit showed up in different backgrounds, different positions, but always at the edges, always watching. A child in old-fashioned clothes appeared in family portraits spanning 50 years, never aging, never changing. They were appearing in my grandmother's photographs, being captured somehow by her camera, pulled from whatever time they belonged to and frozen in images of the present. No, not pulled, drawn. Coming through of their own accord, attracted to something in the studio, something in the camera, something in the act of photography itself. I found my grandmother's journals in a desk drawer. Leather, bound books filled with her cramped handwriting, dating back to 1952, when she'd opened the studio. The early entries were mundane. Appointment notes, technical details about exposures and chemicals, complaints about difficult clients. But then, in 1954, an entry that made my hands shake saw my first one today, in the Wilkins family portrait. Check the negatives 3 times. It's there in the original. A woman in the background, wearing a dress from before the war. Asked the Wilkins if they had a relative visiting. They looked at me like I was insane. Said they were alone in the studio except for me. But she's there in the photograph. Standing behind little Michael, her hand almost touching his shoulder. Almost. The entries continued. More sightings. More figures appearing in photographs. My grandmother experimenting, trying to understand what was happening. Taking test shots of empty rooms and finding people in them. Photographing herself and discovering strangers standing beside her reflection. And then, in 1958, this entry, I understand now. The camera sees more than our eyes. It captures light from all times, not just the present. Time isn't linear in photographs. It's layered. Every moment that ever existed in this space overlaps, and the camera catches fragments of them all. The figures aren't ghosts. They're photographs. Images of people caught by light years or decades ago, still echoing through this space, still waiting to be developed. They're aware. I'm certain now. They know when the camera is pointed at them. They pose for it. They move to be included in the frame. They want to be seen. The later entries grew stranger. My grandmother describing conversations with the figures. Not spoken conversations. They couldn't speak, but communications through pose and position, messages delivered in the language of photography. She wrote about learning their stories. The woman in the dark dress who'd been photographed in this studio in 1923 and had never quite left. The man in the suit who'd posed for a portrait in 1940, the day before shipping out to war. His image so strong, so desperate to be remembered, that it had burned itself into the space. The child who died young in 1895, when a different building stood on this site. Her last photograph taken here, her image still echoing through whatever occupied this ground. They weren't haunting the studio. They were the studio. Layers of light and memory and captured moments, all existing simultaneously in the space between lens and film. And they were growing stronger. My grandmother's later entries described the figures appearing in more photos, becoming clearer, more defined. She wrote about clients complaining, refusing to pay for portraits, that showed strangers in the background. She wrote about closing the studio to walk-ins, only photographing specific subjects, trying to control what the camera captured. The final entry, dated 3 weeks before her death, "They want out. I've been developing them for 70 years, giving them definition, making them more real with each photograph. They exist in the images now more solidly than they ever existed in life. And they're learning to move between photographs, learning to step from one image into another, learning, I think, to step from images into reality. I've kept them contained here, but I'm old and tired. When I'm gone, someone else will have to understand. Someone else will have to maintain the boundaries. Someone else will have to keep photographing, keep developing, keep giving them the attention they crave so they don't look for it elsewhere. I'm leaving the studio to my granddaughter. She has my eyes. She'll see what I've seen. She'll understand what needs to be done." I looked up from the journal. The studio felt different now, heavier, more present, as if it was aware of me reading these words, aware of me learning its secrets. The photographs I'd laid out on the floor seemed to have moved, shifted position slightly. The out of time figures were facing different directions than before, turned toward me, oriented to my position in the room. I stood carefully and walked to the camera. The massive view camera on its tripod, pointing at the empty space where subjects would stand. How many people had stood there over the years? How many moments had been captured, developed, preserved? How many fragments of time had been pulled into this space and held here? I looked through the viewfinder, ducking under the black cloth the way my grandmother must have done thousands of times. The studio looked different through the lens. Darker, more crowded. I could see them now, the figures from the photographs. Not clearly, not solidly, but unmistakably present, standing along the walls, sitting on chairs, arranged in the positions they'd held in life, in death, in the moments they'd been photographed. The woman in the dark dress stood near the door, hands folded, patient. The man in the suit leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. The child sat on the floor, playing with something invisible content. And others, so many others. Decades of photographic subjects layered over each other, occupying the same space in different times. All of them existing here simultaneously, because the camera had captured them, and the captures had never been released. I stepped back from the camera. The figures faded, became invisible again without the lens between us. But I could still feel them. The weight of their presence, the pressure of their attention. They wanted to be photographed, needed it. It was the only way they could maintain their existence, whatever strange half. Life they lived between the moments of their original images and the current present. My grandmother had understood, had spent 70 years feeding them, giving them what they needed, keeping them satisfied and contained. And now that task was mine. I found film in the darkroom. Old film, the kind nobody used anymore, stored in a freezer to preserve it. My grandmother had been stockpiling it, preparing for a future when such film couldn't be bought, when her successor would need supplies to continue the work. I loaded the camera. The process was complex, requiring skills I didn't have, but my hands seemed to remember what my mind didn't. Muscle memory inherited along with the studio, perhaps. Or guidance from something else, something that wanted this to continue. I set up lights, adjusted the camera, prepared the scene for a photograph. Then I stood in front of the lens and triggered the shutter with a cable release, taking a self-portrait in the empty studio. The camera clicked. The shutter opened and closed. Light fell on film, capturing my image, burning it into silver halide crystals that would When developed, show me standing alone in the studio. Except I knew I wouldn't be alone in the photograph. I developed the film in the darkroom, following procedures my grandmother had detailed in her journals. The red light made everything feel unreal, timeless. I watched my image emerge in the developer tray, features resolving from blank paper. The chemical magic of photography manifesting before my eyes. And yes, there they were, standing behind me, around me, filling the space I'd thought was empty. The woman in the dark dress, the man in the suit, the child, all the others, captured together with me in a single image, our times overlapping, our moments merged. They were clearer in this photograph than in any of my grandmother's. More defined, more present, as if my image had given them strength, as if being photographed alongside someone from the current time had anchored them more firmly to now. The woman in the dark dress was looking at the camera, looking at me through the camera, and she was smiling. I hung the photograph to dry and returned to the studio proper. They were more visible now. Not solid, not quite, but less translucent. I could see them moving along the walls, shifting position, arranging themselves, preparing for the next photograph, already hungry for more attention. More development, more proof that they existed. I understood what my grandmother had done, why she'd kept the studio running for 70 years. They needed to be photographed. Needed those moments of capture and development to maintain their presence. Without it, they would fade. Or worse, they would seek out other sources of light, other lenses, other ways to be seen. Better to contain them here. Better to give them what they needed in controlled circumstances. Better to become their photographer, their developer, their keeper. I've been running the studio for 6 months now. I don't take clients. Can't risk what they might see in the photographs. Instead, I photograph the studio itself. Empty rooms that aren't empty. Corners filled with figures from other times. Spaces occupied by people who haven't lived for decades, but exist here still, caught in the amber of perpetual light. They're getting clearer. Each photograph makes them more defined. I can see faces now, expressions, details of clothing and bearing. I'm learning their names. Not spoken, but understood through the images I create. The woman in the dark dress is Margaret. The man in the suit is Thomas. The child is Emily. And there are dozens more, each with their own story, their own moment of capture that bound them to this place. They're grateful for the attention. That's what I tell myself. They arrange themselves beautifully for each shot, composing themselves in ways that make for striking images. They're learning to exist more fully with each photograph, becoming less like echoes and more like presence. But sometimes I wonder if my grandmother was wrong, if keeping them contained here isn't enough, if by photographing them, by developing them, by making them more real, I'm not containing them at all, but rather strengthening them, giving them the substance they need to eventually step out of the photographs entirely. I found something yesterday. A photograph my grandmother had hidden, tucked in the back of a drawer, wrapped in black cloth. It showed her at the end, maybe days before she died, standing in the studio. And around her, pressed close, touching her, were the figures, dozens of them. All clear, all solid, all there. And my grandmother's expression in that photograph, it wasn't fear, it was resignation, acceptance. The look of someone who understood what was coming. I developed film yesterday, a self-portrait like I take every week now to keep them satisfied. When I hung it to dry, I saw that the figures were closer than before. Not in the background anymore, but right beside me. The woman in the dark dress's hand on my shoulder. The man in the suit standing at my elbow. The child holding my hand. They're not contained. they're preparing. Using me the way they used my grandmother. Drawing strength from each photograph, growing more solid, more present, more real. Waiting for the moment when they're strong enough to step fully into now, to leave the space between lens and image and walk freely in the world. And I keep photographing them. I can't stop. That's what I've realized. It's not duty or inheritance or understanding that keeps me in this studio night after night, developing film under red light, watching their images emerge from blank paper. It's need. Mine and theirs, intertwined now, inseparable. When I don't photograph them, I feel their absence. The studio feels empty in a way that goes beyond mere lack of physical presence. It's a hunger, a void, something missing that should be there. And I find myself loading film, setting up lights, positioning the camera, taking shot after shot of the spaces they occupy. They reward me for it. That's how it feels. Each photograph I develop shows them more clearly, and with that clarity comes a kind of warmth, an approval that washes over me when I hang the prints to dry. They arrange themselves more beautifully. They reveal more of their stories. They make me feel less alone in this inherited prison, because that's what I understand now. The studio isn't just their prison, it's mine. My grandmother knew. She'd spent 70 years here, slowly being consumed by the need to photograph, to develop, to maintain these hungry images. She'd watched them grow stronger, watched herself grow weaker, watched the boundary between photographer and subject blur, until she couldn't remember which she was anymore. And she'd passed it to me, not as a gift or even as a burden, as a trap. A beautifully constructed cage that looks like inheritance, feels like destiny, but is really just another way to feed the endless appetite of captured light. I tried to leave once, 3 months ago. Packed a bag, locked the studio, drove to the edge of town. Made it almost to the highway before I had to turn back. The need was too strong, the absence too vast. I could feel the studio pulling at me, feel the figures waiting, feel the undeveloped film in the darkroom crying out to be exposed and processed. I came back, developed a dozen rolls that night, hung photographs until the lines were full, until every surface was covered with images of the figures, until the studio was papered with their faces and forms. They were closer than ever in those photographs, not just near me, but overlapping me. Occupying the same space, our bodies merged in the frame, their time and mine bleeding together on the paper. I sleep in the studio now. Can't bring myself to leave even for a night. I've moved a cot into the darkroom, where the red light never goes out, where I can hear the chemicals settling in their trays, where I can feel the photographs hanging above me, drying, developing even in the absence of visible change. And I dream in negatives, light and dark reversed. The figures appear solid and bright while I fade to shadow. We're trading places, I think, each photograph exchanging a little more of their substance for mine, pulling them closer to reality while pushing me deeper into their realm of captured light and frozen time. My reflection in the mirrors looks wrong now, overexposed, fading at the edges. Sometimes when I move, my reflection lags behind, as if the light carrying my image takes too long to travel the distance from body to glass. I'm becoming like them. Another layer. Another echo of a person caught by a camera and held forever in that moment of capture. The figures can see it happening. They watch me with expressions I've learned to read through repeated photography. Not sympathy, not exactly triumph, more like recognition, like they're welcoming me home. Welcoming me to the family of images that have always lived here, that will always live here, that exist in the eternal present of the photograph. I found more of my grandmother's journals yesterday. Hidden ones, Written in her last years, pages filled with increasingly erratic handwriting. She described the process I'm going through now. The gradual dissolution of self. The way photography becomes both sustenance and poison. The slow realization that you're not documenting the figures. You're joining them. She wrote about trying to warn my father, trying to explain why he should never let me inherit the studio. But she couldn't make him understand. How could she? The studio's nature is impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it, hasn't experienced the weight of accumulated images, hasn't stood under the red light and watched themselves emerge in the developer tray alongside people from other times. And maybe she didn't try hard enough. Maybe, by the end, she wanted someone to take her place. Needed someone to continue the work, to keep feeding the figures, to maintain the endless cycle of capture and development. Maybe she needed to know the trap would continue, would catch someone else, would never stop. I've started appearing in old photographs, not new ones I've taken, old ones. My grandmother's photographs from decades ago. I found a portrait from 1976 yesterday, pulled it from the archives to compare with a recent shot, and there I was, standing in the background, blurred and indistinct, wearing clothes I own now, my face barely visible but unmistakably mine. Time isn't linear in photographs. My grandmother wrote that in 1958, and I'm understanding it now in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The camera doesn't just capture the present. It captures all times simultaneously, layers them over each other, creates a space where 1976 and now and every moment in between exist together in the same frame. I'm not just becoming part of the studio's present. I'm being written into its past. Inserted into moments I wasn't alive for, added to the crowd of time figures that have always haunted these images. I tried burning a photograph last week. One of myself, one where the figures were particularly close, particularly solid. I thought maybe destroying the image would weaken the connection, would give me space to think, to plan escape. The photograph wouldn't burn. I held a lighter to it, watched the flame lick the paper's edge, but the image remained untouched. The fire couldn't reach it, or wouldn't. As if the photograph existed slightly outside the physical world, protected by the same properties that made the figures visible, real, hungry. And when I tried, I felt pain. Not in my body, but in something deeper. In the part of me that had already been captured, that already existed more fully in images than in flesh. Burning the photograph would have burned that part too, would have erased not just the image, but the reality it represented. So I stopped, put the photograph back on the line, apologized to it, to them, to the studio itself, and felt that warm approval again, that reward for correct behavior, that reinforcement of the trap. But the coffee shop next door closed last week. The owner said something was wrong with the building, that customers kept complaining about seeing people in their photographs who weren't there when the shots were taken. People from other eras. People in old clothes. People who looked like they existed slightly out of focus with the rest of reality. The figures are spreading, bleeding into adjacent spaces, learning to appear in other cameras, other images, other moments of capture. I should warn people, should put a sign in the window, tell everyone to stay away, explain that photographs taken near here might contain more than what the lens was pointed at, but I can't. The thought of people avoiding the area, of fewer cameras being pointed at buildings near the studio, fills me with anxiety. The figures need to be seen, need to be photographed. And if I don't provide that, if I don't give them enough attention, they'll find other ways to get it. Better to keep them here, keep them focused on me, keep them satisfied with my endless photography, my constant development my complete devotion to their preservation. I'm almost done now. I can feel it. The transition nearly complete. My reflection in the darkroom mirror is barely visible, just a suggestion of presence, while the figures are solid and real behind me, looking over my shoulder at the images I create. Soon I'll appear in a photograph and simply not leave it. We'll step into that captured moment and exist there fully, completely, finally joining the layers of light and memory that make up this place. My grandmother is here too. I saw her yesterday, not in a photograph, but in the studio itself, standing by the camera, watching me work. She looked younger than in her final photographs, clearer, more present than she'd been in life, paradoxically more real now that she'd fully transitioned into image. She didn't speak, can't speak, none of them can, but I understood her expression. Relief, maybe, or vindication. The trap had worked. The cycle continued. Someone new had been caught to photograph the ones who came before, to develop them, to strengthen them, to eventually join them. I'm taking a photograph now. My final one, I think. The camera is set on a timer, giving me 30 seconds to position myself in front of the lens. The figures are arranged around me, closer than they've ever been, touching me with hands that are finally solid, finally warm, finally real. The shutter will click. The light will fall on film. And this moment will be captured, frozen, preserved forever in silver and paper. But I won't develop this photograph. I'll leave that for whoever inherits the studio after me. Let them find it in the darkroom, this final undeveloped role. Let them wonder what it shows. Let them process it under red light, watch the image emerge from blank paper. See me standing with the figures, all of us equally clear, equally present, equally real. Let them see what they're becoming. Let them understand the inheritance they've accepted. Let them know that the camera sees more than eyes, that photographs contain more than moments, that studios can be prisons and images, can be cages and inheritance, can be trap. The timer is counting down. 20 seconds. 15:10. The figures are pressing closer. I can feel their substance now. Their reality that's been building for decades through endless photographs, endless development, endless attention. They're more real than I am. More permanent. More present in this space that exists between times. 5 seconds. I want to run. Want to knock over the camera, expose the film, destroy this final capture before it can happen. But I don't. Can't. Won't, because part of me, most of me now, wants this. Wants to finally step completely into the photographs I've been creating. Wants to exist in that eternal present where time is layered, where moments overlap, where everyone caught by the camera lives forever in the space between lens and image. 2 seconds. The woman in the dark dress, Margaret, takes my hand. Her grip is solid, real, warm. She smiles at me, and I see understanding in her expression. Welcome. Recognition. 1 second. I take a breath. My last breath in linear time. My last moment existing primarily in the present, in the now, in the thin slice of reality that most people call life. The shutter clicks. Light falls on film. The moment is captured, and I am gone. Not dead. Not exactly. Just moved. Transition. Translated from 3-dimensional existence into the 2-dimensional realm of the photograph, where I'll wait with all the others for someone to develop this film, to hang it to dry, to look at it under red light and see us all standing together, clear and present and hungry. Hungry for the next person who inherits the studio. Hungry for the next person who loads the camera. Hungry for the next person who thinks they understand, who thinks they can control it, who thinks they can maintain the boundaries between photographer and subject. We're patient. We have nothing but time. And the studio is always looking for new photographers. always looking for someone with the right eyes, the right understanding, the right willingness to feed us with attention and development and endless photography. My grandmother chose well. I chose well, though I didn't know I was choosing. And whoever inherits next will choose well too, without knowing, without understanding until it's too late. Until they're standing in front of the camera with 30 seconds on the timer and figures pressing close and the shutter about to click. The film is waiting in the darkroom, undeveloped, promising. All you have to do is process it. All you have to do is look. All you have to do is see us waiting here, frozen in the moment of capture, preserved forever in silver and light. And once you see us, once you develop that image, once you hang it to dry and watch our faces emerge from blank paper, well, you'll understand. You'll start photographing. You'll start developing. You'll start feeding us, feeding yourself, feeding the endless hunger that lives in captured light. And eventually, you'll stand in front of the camera, and the timer will count down, and the shutter will click. And you'll join us here, in this place between times, in this eternal present of the photograph. Welcome home. We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting in every photograph ever taken in this studio, in every image that captured more than it should have, in every frame where figures from other times appeared at the edges, watching, waiting, hoping. Hoping someone would see us, hoping someone would understand, hoping someone would come home. The red light never goes out in the darkroom. The chemicals never settle in their trays. The photographs never stop developing. And the figures never stop waiting for the next person who will see them, develop them, join them. The studio is open. The camera is ready. The film is loaded. All you need to do is inherit it. All you need to do is accept. All you need to do is understand. We'll be here, in the photographs, in the light, in the space between moments, forever, waiting, story A. The first message arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I stay late at the office, when the fluorescent lights hum their electric lullaby, and the building settles into its evening silence. My phone buzzed against the glass desk, a sound like an insect trapped beneath a cup. The notification glowed in the dimness, a message from an unknown number. Just a photo, no text, no explanation. I almost deleted it without looking. We all get these things now, spam, wrong numbers, the digital detritus of modern life. But something made me tap the screen. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe it was already too late by then. Maybe the choice was never really mine. The photo showed my apartment building. Taken from across the street, I guessed, from that small park with the dying elm tree. The angle was slightly upward, capturing the 4th floor where I lived. My window was there, curtains drawn. A thin line of light visible where they didn't quite meet. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Just my building in the early evening. The sky, that particular shade of purple that comes before true darkness. I should have felt concerned. A stranger had photographed my home, but the image seemed so innocuous, so ordinary, that I convinced myself it was a mistake. Perhaps someone trying to send a photo to a friend, getting my number wrong by a single digit. These things happen. I deleted it and returned to my spreadsheets. The second message came 3 days later. This time I was on the subway, wedged between a woman reading a paperback thriller and a man whose headphones leaked tinny music. The train rocked through its underground passages, lights flickering as we passed through stations whose names I'd stopped noticing years ago. My phone buzzed, same unknown number. Another photo, closer this time. The elm tree filled half the frame now, its bare branches reaching toward my building like arthritic fingers. The shot was taken from the park bench, I realized. The one I sometimes sat on during lunch breaks, eating sandwiches and watching pigeons fight over discarded crusts. And there, in the lower right corner of the image, was something I hadn't noticed before. A shadow. Not a normal shadow, not the kind cast by streetlights or passing cars. This was darker, more defined, standing upright near the base of the tree. Human shape, but somehow wrong. The proportions didn't quite match. The head too large, the limbs too long. And it seemed to be facing the camera, though it had no features, no face, just that deep, absolute darkness. I zoomed in with trembling fingers. The shadow remained blurry, indistinct, as if it existed slightly out of focus, even when everything around it sharpened. I could see individual leaves on the ground, the grain of the bench's wood, the rust on a nearby trash can, but the shadow stayed nebulous, refusing to resolve into clarity. The train lurched. My stomach lurched with it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a double exposure, a glitch in the camera. I blocked the number, problem solved. But I looked over my shoulder 3 times on the walk home from the station. The third message found me 4 days later. I was in bed, that floating space between waking and sleeping, where thoughts become liquid and reality feels negotiable. My phone's vibration pulled me back to consciousness. I reached for it with that automatic gesture we've all learned, that Pavlovian response to electronic summons. A new number. But I knew, even before I opened it, what I would find. The photo was taken from inside the park now, maybe 20 feet from my building. The angle had shifted, coming closer to ground level. And the shadow was there again, clearer now, standing on the sidewalk just beyond the building's entrance. It seemed larger than before, or perhaps it was just the perspective. But no, even accounting for the camera's position. This shadow was too big, stretching upward in a way that defied the evening light. And it was facing my building's door. I sat up in bed, heart suddenly loud in my ears. The darkness of my bedroom pressed against me. I could hear the radiator ticking, the distant sound of traffic, the building's old bones settling. Normal sounds. Comforting sounds. But they felt thin now, like paper walls against something vast and patient. I didn't delete this photo. Instead, I opened my contacts, fingers hovering over my best friend's name, over the police non-emergency line. But what would I say? Someone's sending me photos of my building. There's a weird shadow in them. It sounded absurd even in my own mind. The police had real crimes to deal with. My friend would tell me to stop watching horror movies before bed. I looked at the photo again, zoomed in on the shadow. This close. I could almost see texture in that darkness, like layers of black on black, like depth that shouldn't exist in a two-dimensional image. And there, at what might have been the head, were 2 points of lesser darkness. Not light exactly, but an absence of that absolute black. Like eyes, like something looking back. I turned off my phone and pulled the covers over my head like a child. I did not sleep well. The messages came faster after that. Every few days, then every day, then multiple times a day. Different numbers, always unknown, always blocked after I saw them. But they kept coming, as inevitable as tide, as persistent as decay. And the shadow kept getting closer. A photo from the sidewalk, directly in front of my building. The shadow on the first step. A photo from inside the lobby. The shadow by the mailboxes. A photo of the 4th floor hallway. The shadow near the elevator. A photo of my door. The shadow standing right there, in the corridor I walked every day. The door I locked every night. My door. I stopped going to work. Called in sick, then took vacation days, then simply stopped answering my manager's calls. I ordered food for delivery, leaving notes to leave it in the hallway, waiting until I heard the elevator depart before cracking my door open to grab the bags. I covered my windows with blankets. I moved my mattress into the bathroom, the only room without windows, and slept in the tub with the shower curtain pulled closed and the light on. My phone kept buzzing. I turned it off, but I could still feel it sometimes, phantom vibrations against my leg, against my mind. I removed the battery. It didn't help. The messages existed now, out there in some server, some cloud, some digital space that had no respect for physical barriers like battery removal or disconnection. Friends came by. I didn't answer. They knocked and called through the door. Their voices muffled and distant, and I held my breath in the bathroom until they left. My landlord came with a key after a few weeks, concerned about the unpaid rent, the unopened mail. He called out as he entered, then walked through the apartment, and I heard his footsteps pause outside the bathroom. "You okay in there?" His voice was kind, worried. I wanted to answer, wanted to explain. But how could I make him understand? How could I tell him about the shadow that was coming closer with each message? That was approaching through photographs, like someone walking through mirrors, crossing the distance between sender and receiver 1 pixel at a time. "I'm calling someone," he said finally. "You need help." I heard him leave, heard the door close, heard the lock engage with a sound like finality. My phone was in the living room, still in pieces, battery and SIM card scattered on the coffee table like ruins. But I had an old tablet in a drawer, bought years ago for reading in bed, and then forgotten. I crawled out of the bathroom, moving fast, keeping low as if something might see me through the covered windows. Found the tablet, turned it on. The screen glowed to life, and there, waiting in my email, were the messages, forwarded somehow, bleeding through from one device to another. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Scrolling through them made my eyes hurt, each image a moment frozen in that impossible approach. And the latest one, sent just minutes ago, showed my bathroom door, from inside the apartment. The shadow stood in my hallway, facing the bathroom where I'd been hiding. I could see my coffee table in the frame, the scattered pieces of my phone, the blanket hanging over the living room window. The shadow was inside now, past all my locks and barriers, existing in the space I occupied, sharing the air I breathed. The tablet buzzed in my hands. New message. I didn't want to look. I wanted to throw the tablet, to run, to scream. But my thumb moved of its own accord, opening the message, revealing the photo. It was taken from right outside the bathroom door. I could see the door frame, the handle, the crack of light bleeding out from under the door. And the shadow filled the frame now, enormous, taking up almost the entire photo. That terrible darkness reaching toward the lens, toward me, toward the moment when distance would finally collapse to nothing. 2 points of lesser darkness stared out from the black, waiting. I sit in the bathtub now, writing this on the tablet's notes app. The bathroom door is locked, though I know that won't matter. Locks and doors and walls. These are just suggestions, aren't they? Just polite fictions we maintain about safety and separation. The shadow has proven that. It's been proving it with each photo, each step closer, each boundary crossed. The tablet keeps buzzing. New messages arriving every few minutes now. I haven't looked at them. I can't, because I know what they'll show. The bathroom door, then the shower curtain, then the tub. Each photo marking another step in an approach that's already finished. That finished the moment I opened that first message and looked at my own building from across the street. The overhead light flickers sometimes. When it does, I see shadows on the shower curtain. They move wrong, bulging inward, as if something is pressing against the other side. As if something is leaning close, examining me through the plastic barrier, measuring the distance of this final step. My phone is buzzing now, but I left it in the living room, took it apart. The sound is coming from somewhere else, from everywhere. From the spaces between the tiles, from the pipes behind the walls, from the electrical sockets and the drain and the mirror I've turned to face the wall. The light flickers again. I can see something through the shower curtain now. A shape, darker than dark, growing larger or coming closer. I can't tell which. Maybe there's no difference. Maybe distance is just another comfortable lie we tell ourselves. The tablet buzzes one more time. I look down. One final message. One final photo. It shows the inside of the bathtub. Shows me sitting here, hunched over the tablet, my face illuminated by its glow. And standing right behind me, leaning over my shoulder, close enough to touch, close enough to taste, is the shadow. I can feel its breath on my neck now, cold and absent, like wind through empty rooms. I can feel it looking at the screen with me, reading these words as I type them. I can feel it smile, though it has no mouth. The distance is 0 now. We occupy the same space, the shadow and I. We always have, I think, since that first message, maybe before. Maybe the photos were never about approach at all. Maybe they were about recognition. About showing me what was already here, standing behind me in every mirror, walking beside me in every crowd, lying next to me in every bed. The light flickers one last time. In the darkness between flickers, I see that I am not alone in this tub, have never been alone. The shadow isn't separate from me. It's mine. It's always been mine. Growing longer with each sunset, stretching further with each passing year, darkening and deepening until it became solid enough to photograph. Real enough to send messages, present enough to arrive. The light comes back on. I look at the shower curtain. I can see my shadow cast upon it by the overhead bulb. Just my shadow. Ordinary. Exactly where it should be. But the angle is wrong. The light is behind me, so my shadow should be in front of me, cast onto the curtain. But this shadow is behind me, between me and the light source, defying every law of physics and optics. It raises one arm. I haven't moved mine. It reaches toward me. The tablet buzzes one final time. I don't look at the message. I know what it shows. I close my eyes and wait for my shadow to touch me, to pull me into that darkness where distance means nothing and arrival is eternal, where messages travel not through wires and signals, but through the spaces between moments, the gaps between heartbeats, where I've been waiting all along. The buzzing stops. The light goes out, and in the darkness, I feel my shadow finally come home. Story 9. I found the diary in my grandmother's attic on a Tuesday afternoon when the light was dying. It was wedged between 2 wooden beams, wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed with age. The fabric crumbled between my fingers like ancient paper, releasing a scent of lavender and something else. Something faintly chemical, like formaldehyde. The diary itself was unremarkable. Brown leather binding, edges worn soft from handling. No name embossed on the cover, no decoration. Just a book. I opened it because that's what you do when you find something hidden, isn't it? You open it. The first entry was dated March 3rd, 1952. The handwriting was careful, precise, the kind they taught in schools before cursive became optional. Thomas came by again today, it read. He brought flowers, white roses. I told him I wasn't interested, but he doesn't listen. He never listens. I turned the page. March 7th. Thomas fell down the stairs at work. Broke his arm in 3 places. Mother says I shouldn't feel guilty, but I can't help wondering if I'd been kinder to him. Maybe he would have been more careful. Maybe he wouldn't have been so distracted. Something cold touched the back of my neck. I told myself it was just the draft from the attic window. March 15th. Thomas is dead. They say his heart just stopped. He was only 26. I attended the funeral. His mother wouldn't look at me. I should have closed the diary then. I should have wrapped it back in its cloth and pushed it deep between the beams where it had waited for however many decades. But curiosity is a hungry thing, and I kept reading. April 2nd. Margaret from church invited me to tea. She's trying to set me up with her brother. I wish people would stop trying to fix me. I'm not broken. April 9th. Margaret didn't come to service today. Father Murphy said she took ill suddenly. Something with her lungs. April 13th. Margaret died this morning. Pneumonia, they're calling it. Though she was healthy as a horse just last week. Her brother looked at me strangely at the funeral, like he knew something. But what could he know? I'm just unlucky, that's all. People around me are unlucky. My hands were trembling. I told myself it was just the cold. The attic was always cold, even in summer. The entries continued. Each one mentioned a person. Each person suffered some misfortune. Minor at first. A broken engagement, a lost job, a house fire that destroyed only memories, not lives. But as the entries progressed through 1952 and into 1953, the misfortunes grew darker. A drowning, a car accident, a sudden illness that the doctors couldn't explain. And always, the diarist's voice remained calm, measured, slightly puzzled. I don't understand why these things keep happening. Read one entry. Mother says I'm cursed. But that's superstitious nonsense, isn't it? I found myself wondering who had written this diary. The entries never named the author, never used I, with any identifying information. Just observations, reflections, and the mounting body count of people who had crossed paths with the writer. The last entry was dated December 17th, 1953. I'm sealing this diary away. I can't bear to write in it anymore. Every time I commit someone's name to these pages, something terrible happens. It's coincidence. It has to be. But I won't take the chance. I won't write another name. I won't be responsible for another death. The next page was blank. So was the one after. The rest of the diary was empty, waiting. I should have stopped there. I should have burned the thing. But instead, I thought about Marcus. Marcus from work. Marcus who had humiliated me in the last staff meeting. Marcus who had stolen my project proposal and presented it as his own. Marcus who was now getting the promotion that should have been mine. The pen was in my hand before I made a conscious decision to pick it up. An old fountain pen that had been lying in the dust beside where the diary was hidden. The ink had dried decades ago, but when I uncapped it, the nib gleamed wet and ready. October 15, 2025, I wrote. The handwriting didn't look like mine. It was too careful, too precise. Marcus made things difficult again today. My hand shook, but I kept writing. He's a cruel man. He takes pleasure in others' suffering. I wonder if he's ever faced real consequences for his actions. I stopped. Read what I'd written. It felt heavier than mere words on paper. That was 3 weeks ago. Marcus called in sick the next day. Food poisoning, they said. Then his car was totaled in a parking lot. Hit and run, driver never found. Then his apartment flooded from a burst pipe. Each incident grew progressively worse. Today I heard he's in the hospital. Something neurological. The doctors are baffled. I tried to cross out what I'd written about Marcus. I used whiteout. I tore out the page. But when I opened the diary again, the entry was still there on a page that looked untouched, as if the diary had regenerated itself. So I stopped opening it. I put it in a box, locked the box, shoved it under my bed. I told myself I'd throw it away, burn it, bury it somewhere it would never be found. But I keep thinking about other people. Jennifer, who lives upstairs and plays her music too loud at night. The landlord who raised my rent twice this year. The driver who cut me off this morning and nearly caused an accident. I think about them, and I think about the diary under my bed, and I wonder. The worst part is the dreams. In my dreams, I'm opening the diary. I'm writing names. And as I write, I can see the people, clear as day, as if I'm watching through a window into their lives. I see the moment things go wrong for them. The slip on the stairs, the wrong medication, the gas leak, the distracted driver. And in the dreams, I'm not horrified. I'm satisfied. I wake up gasping, telling myself it was just a dream. But then I remember I did write Marcus's name, and Marcus is suffering. Last night, I dreamed about my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Sweet old Mrs. Chen, who bakes me cookies and feeds the stray cats. In the dream, I wrote her name in the diary. I wrote, "Mrs. Chen is always so kind. I hope nothing bad happens to her." When I woke up, my hands smelled like fountain pen ink. I haven't seen Mrs. Chen this morning. Her newspapers are piling up outside her door. I keep telling myself I'm not going to open the diary again. I'm going to throw it away. Today. Right now. I'm going to take it somewhere far from here and destroy it. But there's a faculty meeting this afternoon, and Jennifer from HR will be there. Jennifer, who reported me for being 5 minutes late when she takes our long lunch breaks. Jennifer, who smiles while she creates problems. And the diary is under my bed. And I know where grandmother kept her old fountain pens. The thing about curses is that they only work if you believe in them. That's what I keep telling myself. This is all coincidence. Correlation isn't causation. Marcus's problems have nothing to do with me. Mrs. Chen is probably just out visiting family. But I found something else in the attic yesterday. I went back up, drawn by something I couldn't name. Behind the beams where the diary had been hidden, I found newspaper clippings, obituaries. Dozens of them from the 1950s, each one circled in red ink. And beneath them, a photograph. A young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to follow you across the room. On the back, in that same careful handwriting, this was me. Before I understood what I was. The woman in the photograph looks exactly like my grandmother. I asked my mother about it. She got very quiet, then told me we don't talk about grandmother's youth. Some things are better left buried, she said. Then she asked if I'd found anything in the attic. Her voice was too casual, too careful. I lied. I said no. But now I'm wondering, was the diary hidden or was it left there? Left for someone to find. Someone like me. There's a sound coming from under my bed right now. A soft rustling, like pages turning in a breeze, even though there is no breeze. Even though the diary is locked in a box. I should check on Mrs. Chen. I should knock on her door, make sure she's okay. But first, I think I'll just take a quick look at the diary. Just to make sure I didn't accidentally write her name while I was dreaming. Just to check. The lock on the box opened on the first try, even though I don't remember where I put the key. The diary is open to a fresh page. My fountain pen is lying across it, still wet with ink. And there, in that careful, precise handwriting that's starting to look more and more like mine, is an entry dated today. It says, I'm reading these words right now. I'm holding the diary in my hands. And I'm starting to understand that I never found this diary at all. The rest of the page is blank, but I can feel words forming in my mind, urgent, demanding to be written. Outside, I hear a siren. It's getting closer. Mrs. Chen's door is still closed. And I'm sitting here with a pen in my hand, watching my handwriting change, watching it become more precise, more careful, more like the entries from 1952. The diary wants me to write. It's always wanted someone to write. That's what it's for. That's what it does. I'm going to put it down now. I'm going to close it and walk away. But even as I think this, my hand is moving. The pen is touching paper. And I'm writing a name. I'm writing my own. Story 10. The hallway is exactly 7 feet long. I measured it on my third day working the night shift at Riverside Manor. 97 feet from the nurse's station to the supply closet at the far end. 22 rooms, 11 on each side, housing patients who sleep through the night or don't sleep at all. The light started flickering on my 5th day. Small things at first. A strobe effect over room 7, a momentary dimming near the water fountain. The kind of electrical inconsistency that happens in old buildings with old wiring. The day shift supervisor assured me maintenance had been notified. They'd get to it when they could. Budget constraints, you understand. I understood. I've worked enough night shifts at enough facilities to know that when they can means probably never. You learn to work around these things. You learn that shadows are just shadows, and silence is just the absence of sound, and footsteps behind you in an empty hallway are just the building settling. Except when they're not. The lights started flickering more on my 9th day. A pattern emerged, though I didn't recognize it as a pattern at first. The lights at the nurse's station would dim. Then the next set. Then the next, a wave of darkness rolling down the hallway like water. It would reach the end, pause, then reverse, the lights brightening again in sequence. It looked like something was walking. Walking down the hall, then back again. I mentioned it to Gerald, the orderly who sometimes stayed late. He laughed. Old place like this, he said. You see all kinds of things. Last month, Clara swore she saw a man in a suit standing in room 14, but that room's been empty since Mr. Patterson passed. Building's got its quirks. I asked what happened to Mr. Patterson. Gerald's smile faded. Heart attack, they said. Clara found him in the morning. Said his face looked scared, like he'd seen something. He paused. Room 14's right in the middle of that hallway, where the lights flicker worst. That night, I paid more attention to the pattern. The lights would dim starting at 11:47 p.m., always 11:47. The darkness would progress down the hall, one fixture at a time, steady as a heartbeat. When it reached the supply closet, it would stop for exactly 13 seconds. Then the lights would restore reverse order until the hallway was bright again. This cycle repeated every hour throughout the night. 11:47, 12 for 7:47. I told myself it was an electrical timer, some quirk of the system. Buildings have rhythms just like people. On my 14th day, Mrs. Kowalski in room 9 pressed her call button at 11:46 p.m. I was at her door when the lights started to dim. I stood in her doorway, helping her adjust her pillows, and watched the darkness approach. It moved like a shadow, but shadows need light to cast them. This was the absence of light, and it moved with purpose. When it reached room 8, right across from where I stood, the darkness paused. In that pause, I saw something. Not with my eyes. My eyes saw only the unlit hallway. But I saw it nonetheless. A shape, human-shaped, tall, standing perfectly still in the darkness, facing Mrs. Kowalski's door. Facing me. The lights brightened. The shape was gone. Kowalski thanked me and turned over to sleep. I stood in the hallway for a long time after, watching the bright, steady lights, telling myself I'd imagined it. At 12:47, I was in the break room when the lights dimmed. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. The sound of someone walking on linoleum in hard-soled shoes. The footsteps stopped outside the break room door. I watched the crack under the door. A shadow blocked the light from the hallway. Something stood outside listening. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The shadow remained for 13 seconds exactly. Then the footsteps resumed, fading toward the supply closet. The lights brightened. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. I checked the security footage the next morning before the day shift arrived. The cameras covered the nurse's station and the hallway entrance. Not the full length of the corridor. Budget constraints again. But what the cameras did show was this: at 11:47, 20:47, 1:47, 30:47, 40:47, and 5:47, the hallway lights dimmed on schedule. And at each interval, something moved through the frame. Something the camera registered as a disruption in the video. A glitch that looked like a human silhouette, there and gone too fast to be certain. I should have quit then. I should have found a different job, a different shift. A building with working lights and no history. But I'm good at my job, and jobs are hard to come by, and I told myself that I could handle a few flickering lights and unexplained sounds. I've worked harder places with stranger problems. On my 19th day, Mr. Chen in room 3 asked me if I'd seen his visitor. "Tall man," he said. "Stands at the end of the hall and watches. Comes every night. You must have seen him." I asked when he'd first noticed this visitor. Mr. Chen thought for a moment. 2 weeks ago. Maybe 3. He stands there when the lights go funny. Just watching. I don't like it. Mrs. Rodriguez in room 17 told me something similar the next night. "There's someone who walks up and down," she said. "When it gets dark, I hear him stop at my door sometimes. I keep my door locked now." Her door had no lock. None of the patient doors did. Safety regulations. I started keeping track. 14 residents had mentioned the visitor. Some saw him clearly. Others just felt his presence. But they all agreed on 3 things: he was tall, he appeared when the lights flickered, and he was searching for something. On my 23rd day, I was changing the blankets in room 14, the room where Mr. Patterson had died, when the lights began to dim. I froze, arms full of linens. The darkness approached from the nurse's station, rolling closer. It stopped at room 14's doorway. Stopped and remained there. The light fixture directly outside the room dark, while the ones on either side still glowed. Something entered the room. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. The temperature dropped. My breath misted in the air. The shadows in the room deepened, gathered, concentrated into something that stood between me and the door. I dropped the blankets. The shape moved closer. I could almost see it now. A suggestion of a form, a density to the darkness that the room's darkness didn't have. It was studying me, deciding something. Then, from far down the hall, a call button chimed. Room 22. The shape turned toward the sound. In that moment of distraction, I ran. I pushed past where the shape stood, felt a coldness like ice water as I passed through the space it occupied, and I ran down the hallway toward the lit nurse's station. Behind me, the lights brightened in sequence. When I looked back, the hallway was empty and bright, but room 14's door was closed. I had left it open. I pulled the employee records that night, using the office computer while the supervisor was on break. I searched for any incidents in the building's history, unexplained deaths, accidents, anything that might explain what walked the hallway. I found it in a file from 17 years ago. A maintenance worker named Thomas Garrett. He'd been working late, replacing light fixtures in the main hallway. Something had gone wrong. They found him the next morning beneath the supply closet, electrocuted. The coroner's report said his death was instantaneous. The incident report noted that all the hallway lights had been found switched off, though Garrett would have needed them on to work. Someone, or something, had turned off the lights while he was working. His death was ruled an accident. The facility paid a settlement to his family. The lights were repaired. Life continued. But I noticed something else in the file. In the 17 years since Garrett's death, there had been 19 unexplained patient deaths in Riverside Manor, all in rooms along that hallway, all occurring during night shift, all with the same notation: patient found deceased, face expressing distress, time of death estimated between 1100 p.m. and 6:30 a.m. dawn. Room 14 was on that list twice. I should have quit that night. That moment, I should have walked out and never come back. But I'm not a coward, and I'm not a fool. I'm a nurse. I'm supposed to protect people. And the people in that hallway needed protection. I started staying closer to the patient rooms during the flicker times. If something was hunting, if something was searching, I would make myself the easier target. I would draw its attention away from the vulnerable. At 11:47, I stood in the center of the hallway. The lights began to dim. The darkness approached. I stood my ground. It stopped 3 feet away. The shape was clearer now that I wasn't running, now that I was looking directly at where it should be. Tall, yes. Human-shaped, yes. But wrong in the details. The proportions were off. The arms too long. The head tilted at an angle that no living neck should manage. "Thomas Garrett," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is that you?" The shape moved closer. I felt that cold again, that presence. And then, for just a moment, I saw him. Really saw him. A man in work clothes, his face burned, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. He was reaching toward me, mouth open, trying to speak. The lights brightened. He was gone. But I understood now. He wasn't hunting. He was searching. Looking for help. Looking for someone who could see him, who could hear him, who could understand that he was still here, and trapped in those 13 seconds when the lights went dark. I researched obsessively after that. I read about electrical deaths, about the way electricity can affect the human body, the nervous system, the brain. I read about people who claimed to see spirits in places where violent electrical events had occurred. I read about time and how some physicists believe that moments of extreme trauma can create echoes, recordings that play back again and again. Thomas Garrett died at 11:47 p.m. on a November night 17 years ago. His watch, found on his body, had stopped at exactly that time. And every hour since, on the hour plus 40, 7 minutes, the lights recreated his final moments. The darkness that killed him, walking the hallway searching. But searching for what? I found my answer in his personnel file. The night he died, he'd been responding to complaints about the hallway lights. Multiple complaints over multiple nights. The lights had been flickering, creating patterns, disturbing the patients. He'd stayed late to fix it, working alone because of budget constraints. The complaints had started 2 weeks before his death, and they described the exact same pattern I was seeing now. Lights dimming in sequence, darkness moving down the hall, pausing, returning. Something had been walking that hallway before Thomas Garrett died. He'd been trying to fix it, and whatever it was, it had killed him for interfering. Now he walked too, trapped in the same pattern. Searching for the thing that had killed him, or searching for a way out, or searching for someone to break the cycle. On my 31st day, Chen passed away, peacefully in her sleep, the day shift nurse told me. Natural causes. She was 93. But when I saw her in the morning, before they took her away, her face held that expression, that fear. Her room was directly across from room 14. I decided then, I would end this. I would break the pattern, whatever it took. I came in early that night, before the evening shift left. I went to the supply closet at the end of the hall, the place where Thomas Garrett had died. I searched until I found it, an old circuit breaker box, painted over and forgotten behind shelves of supplies. The same box that would have been here 17 years ago. I opened it. Inside, the circuits were labeled in faded handwriting. And there, on the main breaker, someone had scratched something into the metal. Not words, a symbol. Crude, angular, wrong to look at. I photographed it. Later, much later, I would learn it was a sigil. Protection magic, from a tradition I didn't understand and probably shouldn't have investigated. Someone had carved it there, probably decades ago. A maintenance worker, or a custodian, or someone who knew that sometimes buildings need more than physical maintenance, but the protection had failed, or been corrupted, or simply worn out after too many years. That night, at 11:47, I was standing in the hallway again, waiting. The lights began to dim, but this time, I had brought something. A flashlight. A simple flashlight with fresh batteries. As the darkness moved down the hall, I turned it on. My beam cut through the dimness, illuminating the corridor. And in that light, I saw them both. Thomas Garrett trapped in his death moment reaching out, and the other one, the original one. The thing that had been walking this hallway long before Thomas died. It was tall, yes. Human-shaped, yes. But it was older than the building, older than the ground the building stood on. It wore darkness like skin. Where it stepped, the light died. Not just dimmed, died, as if the bulbs had never existed, as if light itself had never been invented. It saw me. It saw my flashlight. And it turned. Thomas Garrett stood between us. Between me and that thing. He couldn't speak, but I understood. He was warning me, protecting me. Doing in death what he'd failed to do in life. The darkness reached for him. He dissolved like smoke. The darkness reached for me. I ran to the supply closet. The thing followed, the lights dying in its wake. I could hear it behind me, not footsteps, but something else. The sound of light being extinguished, the sound of absence. I reached the circuit breaker. My hand shook as I opened it. The sigil gleamed in my flashlight beam, an old protection that had almost worked, almost kept the building safe. I didn't know the right symbols. I didn't know the right words. But I knew something about light and darkness. I knew something about electricity and death. I knew that Thomas Garrett had died trying to stop this thing, and I wasn't going to let his death be meaningless. I flipped every breaker in the box. All at once, the entire hallway went dark. Every light, every exit sign, every indicator light on every monitor. Total darkness. And in that darkness, the thing stopped. I heard it, felt it, just feet away. Waiting, in its element now, triumphant. I waited 3 seconds. 5, 10, 13. Then I flipped the breakers back on. All of them. At once. Every light in the hallway blazed at full power. The surge was enormous. I heard bulbs exploding. Smelled burning plastic. But for one moment, that hallway was brighter than daylight. Brighter than it had ever been. Bright enough to burn. In that light, I saw the thing clearly for the first time and last time. It was screaming. Dissolving. It had lived in darkness for so long that light had become poison to it. The sudden surge, the unexpected brightness was destroying it. And I saw Thomas Garrett one more time. He wasn't reaching anymore. He was smiling. Fading but smiling. Finally free. Then the main breaker tripped. The hallway went dark again. Emergency lights kicked on, bathing everything in dim red. I stood in the supply closet, breathing hard, waiting for something to reach for me in the darkness. Nothing did. The lights stayed off for 2 days while maintenance worked on the system. I worked those days, walking the hallway with flashlights and portable lamps. The patients complained about the darkness, but none of them mentioned the visitor. None of them felt watched. When the lights came back on, they didn't flicker anymore. They burned steady and bright. The electrician said, It was a miracle the whole system hadn't been destroyed. Said it looked like every bulb had burned at 3 times capacity for several seconds. Should have been impossible. I told him that old buildings sometimes surprise you. It's been 60 days since that night. The lights in the hallway worked perfectly. No dimming, no flickering, no patterns. The death rate in Riverside Manor has dropped. The patients sleep better. The night shift is quiet and peaceful. But sometimes at 11:47, I wake up. Some nights I'm home, some nights I'm on break at work. I wake up, and for just a moment, I feel that cold, that presence. I see a shadow at the edge of my vision, and I wonder if I really destroyed it, or if I just made it angry. I wonder if it's looking for me now, in the dark hours, in the empty spaces. I wonder if the next time the lights flicker, anywhere, in any building, it will be there, waiting. I've started leaving lights on when I sleep. Night lights in every room. I tell myself it's just a precaution, just sensible. But the truth is I'm afraid of the dark now in a way I never was before. Because I know what lives in it. I know what walks in that space between light and shadow. And I know that Thomas Garrett's protection only worked because he was willing to die for it. I wonder what I'll be willing to do when it finds me again. The thing about patterns is that they don't really end. They just change, transform. The darkness doesn't walk the halls of Riverside Manor anymore. But sometimes, when I'm coming home late, I see the streetlights flicker as I pass underneath them, dimming in sequence, one after another, following me. And I walk faster. I keep my flashlight ready. I watch the shadows, because the lights always flicker before the darkness comes, and the darkness is always searching, always hungry, always patient. And now, it knows my name, Story 11. The forest started whispering to me 3 days into my stay at Thornwood Cabin. I'd rented it for a month. A writing retreat, I told my friends, though really it was more of a hiding. From deadlines I couldn't meet, from expectations I couldn't fulfill, from the constant noise of a city that never let me think. Thornwood was perfect, isolated, peaceful. Nothing for miles but pine trees and silence. At least I thought it was silence. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I unpacked, settled in, took long walks on the trails that webbed through the forest. The cabin was simple but comfortable. One large room with a kitchenette, a sleeping loft, and windows that looked out onto an ocean of green. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Cell service was non-existent. The Wi-Fi worked, but I kept it turned off. This was supposed to be a digital detox, after all. I should have kept it on. On the 3rd morning, I woke before dawn to the sound of wind moving through the trees. That alone wasn't unusual. The forest was full of sounds, the constant whisper and rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the calls of birds and insects. What was unusual was the pattern. It sounded like words. Not English, nothing I recognized, but the rhythm was unmistakably linguistic. Syllables rising and falling, phrases with emphasis and cadence. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening, telling myself it was just the wind, just my writer's brain finding patterns where none existed. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Something in the forest was speaking. I got up and made coffee, hands shaking slightly. The whispering continued, now seeming to come from all directions at once. I went to the window and looked out at the pre-dawn forest. The trees stood silent and still. There was no wind. The whispering stopped. I spent that day trying to write, but the words wouldn't come. I kept thinking about the sounds I'd heard, trying to rationalize them. Wind through a particular rock formation, maybe. Or animals, though what kind of animal whispered in phrases? I researched on my phone, finding articles about auditory pareidolia. The tendency of the human brain to hear meaningful sounds in random noise. That made sense. That was logical. Except the forest had been completely still. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the loft, watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the forest. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush. Everything natural, everything explainable. Then, around 2 in the morning, the whispering returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. Multiple voices overlapping, creating harmonies and discords. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their urgency, their need to be heard. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them entirely, resonating in my skull. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and went to the window. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the nearest trees. They swayed gently, though again, I felt no wind. As I watched, the whispering grew louder, more agitated. And I realized with mounting horror that the sound was synchronized with the movement of the branches. The trees themselves were speaking. I backed away from the window, my mind refusing to accept what I'd heard. Trees couldn't speak. This was stress, exhaustion, maybe even early psychosis brought on by isolation. I needed to leave, to get back to civilization, to see a doctor. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe. Or the irrational certainty that I was meant to hear this, that I'd been called here for a reason. I spent the next day researching. With the Wi-Fi on, I dove deep into folklore about haunted forests, about places where the veil between worlds grew thin. I read about people who claimed to hear voices in the woods, about ancient beliefs that trees were conscious, aware, capable of communication. Most of it was New Age nonsense or wishful thinking, but some of it felt true, in a way I couldn't articulate. There was one story that stuck with me, a legend from this region about a forest that had learned to speak by listening to humans for centuries. It absorbed our languages, our stories, our secrets. And sometimes, when the conditions were right, when someone spent enough time alone among the trees, the forest would try to speak back. The problem was that human minds weren't built to understand tree language. The grammar was all wrong, the concepts too alien. People who listened too long went mad, their thoughts becoming as tangled and chaotic as roots beneath the earth. I should have left then. Instead, I started listening more carefully. The whispering came every night now, and I'd begun to pick out patterns. Certain phrases repeated. Certain tones seemed to carry specific meanings. I started a notebook, writing down phonetic approximations of what I heard, noting when and how the sounds changed. I wasn't going mad, I told myself. I was doing research. I was being scientific about this. But I stopped checking my email, stopped calling my friends, stopped working on the novel that was supposed to justify this trip. All I did was listen to the forest and try to understand what it was saying. On the 5th night, I understood my first word, come. It was clear as day, embedded in the rustling whisper of 10,000 leaves. Not English, but I understood it anyway, the meaning arriving in my mind fully formed. The forest wanted me to come outside, to come deeper, to come listen more closely. I put on my shoes and opened the door. The night was moonless, the forest a wall of absolute black. I should have been terrified, but I felt only a strange calm. The whispering had stopped, replaced by an expectant silence. I stepped off the porch and onto the trail, my phone flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the darkness. I walked for what might have been minutes or hours. Time felt slippery, unreliable. The trees leaned in close on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out even the stars. My light seemed to be growing dimmer, or maybe the darkness was getting heavier. Then I reached a clearing I'd never seen before. It was perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by ancient pines that must have been centuries old. In the center stood a single oak, larger than any tree I'd seen in this forest. Its trunk so wide that 4 people holding hands couldn't have encircled it. The bark looked almost like skin in the dim light, textured and organic. The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't coming from all around me. It was coming from the oak. I approached slowly, drawn by something I couldn't name. As I got closer, I could see that the bark wasn't just textured, it was carved. Thousands of symbols covered the trunk, spiraling up from the roots and disappearing into the canopy above. Some looked like letters from alphabets I recognized: Greek, Cyrillic, Arabic, Chinese. Others were completely alien, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. I reached out and touched the bark. It was warm. The moment my skin made contact, the whispering exploded into something else entirely. Not sound anymore, but pure meaning, flooding directly into my brain. I saw things, memories that weren't mine, or maybe they were. Maybe they'd always been there, buried deep. I saw the forest as it had been hundreds of years ago, before the logging, before the roads, when it stretched unbroken for hundreds of miles. I saw the people who'd lived here, the ones who'd understood how to listen properly, who'd carved their knowledge into this tree as a warning or a welcome or both. I saw what had happened to them. The forest had spoken to them too, teaching them its language, sharing its ancient knowledge. But human minds weren't built to contain that much information, that much alien thought. The people had tried to hold it all, to remember everything the forest taught them, and in doing so had lost themselves. Their personalities dissolved, their individual identities merging with the collective consciousness of the trees, until they couldn't remember which thoughts were theirs and which belonged to the forest. They were still here in a way, part of the whispering, part of the network of roots and leaves and wind. Not dead, but not human anymore either. And the forest wanted me too. I pulled my hand back, gasping. The vision ended abruptly, leaving me disoriented and nauseous. I stumbled backward, away from the oak, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. "No," I whispered. "No, I don't want this." The whispering took on a plaintive tone, almost sad. The forest wasn't trying to harm me, I realized. It was lonely. It had been speaking to itself for so long, running through the same cycles of growth and decay, the same patterns of life and death. Humans were something new, something interesting. Our thoughts moved so quickly, burned so brightly. The forest wanted to know what that felt like. It wanted to remember what it was like to be individual, separate, alone. But it couldn't understand that what it was offering, connection, unity, the erasure of all boundaries between self and other, was a kind of death to us. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, my phone light bouncing wildly, illuminating nothing useful. Branches grabbed at my clothes, roots tried to trip me. And overhead the trees whispered in a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some angry, some just confused as to why I was leaving. I don't know how I found my way back to the cabin. The trail kept shifting, forking in directions I didn't remember, leading me in circles. But eventually, impossibly, I saw the porch light ahead. I burst through the door and locked it behind me, as if that would make any difference. The whispering continued all night, louder than ever. I huddled on the couch with pillows pressed against my ears, humming tunelessly to block out the sound. But it didn't work. The forest was inside my head now, its language taking root in my neural pathways, teaching me vocabulary I didn't want to know. By morning, I could understand full sentences. Stay with us. Become part of the pattern. Share your thoughts, your dreams, your individual spark. We are lonely in our eternity. We want to know what it means to end. I packed my bags with shaking hands, threw everything in my car, and drove away without bothering to lock the cabin. The property management company could deal with it. I just needed to get away from this place, back to noise and crowds and the blessed anonymity of the city. But even as I drove down the mountain, even as I put miles between myself and Thornwood, I could still hear the whispering. Fainter now, but present. Not just in the trees I passed, but in the grass alongside the road, in the weeds growing through sidewalk cracks, in the houseplants visible through windows. All plants speak, I realized with dawning horror. All of them are part of the network, all of them whispering to each other in frequencies we normally can't hear. The forest had simply taught me how to listen, and once you learn, you can't unlearn. That was 3 months ago. I'm writing this from my apartment in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and blessed silence. I got rid of all my houseplants. I avoid parks and gardens. I buy my vegetables pre-cut and frozen, so I don't have to hear the faint death, whispers of lettuce and carrots. But it's getting harder to ignore. The city isn't as plant-free as I thought. There are street trees outside my window, their branches tapping against the glass at night, trying to get my attention. There's a community garden in the lot next door. And on quiet evenings, I can hear the vegetables gossiping among themselves, sharing nutrients and information through their root networks. And sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear the forest calling from 60 miles away. It remembers me. It wants me back. It's still lonely, still curious about what it's like to be human and temporary and alone. The worst part is that I'm starting to understand why the people in my vision stayed. Why they let themselves dissolve into the forest consciousness. There's a seductive appeal to it. The promise of connection, of never being alone, of joining something vast and ancient and patient. Sometimes I miss the whispering. The city is so loud in its human way, but there's a silence underneath all that noise, an isolation that feels like slowly suffocating. The forest offered connection. The forest offered understanding, even if the price was everything that made me myself. I've started having dreams about the oak tree. In them, I walk back into the clearing, place my hand on the warm bark, and let the knowledge flow into me without resistance. I add my own carvings to the trunk, my name, my stories, everything I am, and feel myself beginning to dissolve, spreading out through the root network, becoming part of something larger than myself. In the dreams, it feels like relief. I wake up from these dreams with tears on my face, though I can't tell if they're from fear or longing. My therapist says I experienced a severe dissociative episode brought on by stress and isolation. She's prescribed medication that helps somewhat. The whispering is quieter now, easier to ignore. But it's still there waiting. I know what's going to happen eventually. I can feel it the way you feel weather changing and inevitability building in my bones. One day, the loneliness will be too much. One day, the promise of connection will outweigh the fear. One day, I'll get in my car and drive back up that mountain, back to Thornwood, back to the clearing with the ancient oak. And I'll let the forest teach me the rest of its language. I'll become fluent in whispers and root, thoughts in the slow green dreaming of chlorophyll. I'll forget my name, my life, everything that makes me separate. I'll spread out through the network like water soaking into soil, everywhere and nowhere, individual and collective, human and forest, and something entirely new. Maybe that's not such a terrible fate. Maybe the people in my vision weren't cautionary tales, but pioneers, brave enough to take the final step into something we don't have words for yet. Or maybe I'm already going mad, and these are just the rationalizations of a mind that's been infected by something it was never meant to hear. I don't know anymore. All I know is that the forest is still whispering, still teaching, still waiting. And sooner or later, I'm going to listen. The trees outside my window are moving now, though there's no wind. They're spelling out something in the language I'm learning despite myself, the language of leaves and time and patient hunger. Come back, they're saying. Come home. And God help me, I'm starting to think they might be right. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you, truly. Having you here, sharing these shadows, makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this, all of us, connected by the love of a good story whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember, they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.